All right, let's do it, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Freedom and Faith podcast. Kyle Chandler joined alongside Mr. Jon and the other Mr. Jon. We got two Johns in the call today. Of course, you all know Jon Sharp, but Jon Ledyard also joining us here for the show. And Mr. Ledyard, thank you so much for your time today. And we're going to have a really, really fun podcast. So let's just jump into things right away here. Our ties go back to Allegheny College. That's where I met you. Jon, where did you meet Jon for the first time?
Yeah, Allegheny College too. Yeah, a couple years ago, I met Jon, and I got to hear I was recruiting for the summer camp that I work at, and I was looking for counselors that would come, college students. So I go to college campuses, and I'm looking for college students that would be interested in serving at our camp during the summer, and the kids that come to camp during the summer, working with those kids and faith and life development and a lot of different things. And so I was talking to Jon and trying to gauge his interest in that, and he never came to do it necessarily, but his girlfriend came and was a counselor with us. And then the next year I came back and I got to meet you, Kyle, at that point in time, and got to hear your testimony, which was exciting. And also we shared this passion, sports media in the background, and we both went to school for the same thing, and you were finishing up school for it. And so yeah, when I heard about this podcast, I was like, let's do this thing. Let's talk some faith and sports. This is the best.
Faith and sports doesn't get any better than that. And again, Jon, we really appreciate your time on the show today. And I think our enthusiasm for having you on was just as much as your enthusiasm for coming on. So sports and media, that's what we're going to be talking about today. And Jon, talk about this camp a little bit more, because I know, again, that's the whole reason why you were at Allegheny College, and that's how we got to meet. And there is that faith-driven aspect behind the camp. So talk about what this camp is and what it does and why you even are there.
Yeah, so I worked in sports media for a long time, as we'll talk about a lot today, and I was covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa Bay. And a couple years ago, one of the guys at this camp who I'd become friends with, and I'd been able to help out at camp before, and as a Christian sports camp in the mountains of Western Pennsylvania called Summer's Best 2 Weeks. And one of the guys that was there reached out to me when I was in Tampa. He's like, "Hey, we're opening up some full-time positions. Is this something you'd be interested in maybe considering to come do?" And I, at the time, was pretty settled into Tampa and honestly didn't think much of it. I was kind of like, man, I really loved when I got to help out a couple summers at Summer's Best 2 Weeks. It was amazing. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt sort of geared to come back to and move back to Pennsylvania, where I'm originally from, and work in this sort of capacity. And there are a couple of key reasons for that, I think, that we'll probably get into a good bit on this show. But one of the biggest things, I think, was just that I felt like there was an opportunity at a place like this to work with college students and young adults and help sharpen the next generation of young Christian leaders, whether it's on college campuses or in the job setting, whatever that might look like in terms of where those leaders were going to end up, and help them be able to relate their faith to their culture in a way that I don't feel like past generations really did a good job of preparing Christian leaders to do. And I think you see that in the church today. There's a lot of brokenness, and that seeing a lot of that and being in a field like the media field, where I got to become friends with a very eclectic and work alongside eclectic groups of people, diverse groups of people from religious backgrounds, race, experiences in America, all of these sorts of things. And as I heard a lot of those things, and I heard a lot of the hurt, and I heard a lot of the wrong that had been done, and realizing how much of that had come from the church and from quote unquote Christians, and that there was somewhere along the way there was a lot of what the Bible actually said was not actually being lived out and communicated to a lot of people, and people were leaving the church because of seeing some of those things. Christians and Christian leaders all across the country. I mean, a lot of this is in the news every single day. You can just look at a headline and you can see a lot of this stuff. Weren't exemplifying Christ, and there was a lot of double standard living, and a lot of that stuff angered me because it was what people on the outside that didn't know Jesus would see, and they would say, well, this is representative of Christ, and why not? Why wouldn't they say that? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so for me, it sort of broke my heart, and I experienced a lot of being friends and close with so many non-Christians. I started to see like things that were ways that Christians were not necessarily living as Christ would live, and so I really just desired to be a part of an organization that would care about living life as Jesus would live it, and teaching college students and young adults to live it the same way. And so the opportunity to do that and to be a part of that and to be developing young college students and leaders that would be going back to campuses and jobs across the country was really exciting to me. And I felt like I could do that and teach and talk about certain topics that the church had not done a very good job of teaching and talking about. And so there is a aspect of college students coming here, and there's a service to the campers that come here during the summer. There also is really a discipleship and a growth process for the staff who come here in the summer. And so both parts excited me, but the opportunity to help the growth and development of the staff that would come here, the college students and young adults, was really exciting to me. And so that was a big reason why I came to Summer's Best 2 weeks and I'm a part of what we're doing now. And this will be my fourth summer here at camp. So I've loved it. I've gotten the opportunity to disciple and to mentor a lot of young leaders have gone on to their college campuses and continue to lead others in Christ. And that has been a real blessing, not only to be able to be a part of God's work in that way, but also to see them expand their view of what it looks like to relate our faith to our culture, which is the biggest thing I think that the church and I say the church and quote unquote, it's always these air quotes with it because I'm not saying every church, but certainly like generally speaking, I think there's a lot of brokenness in how the church relates their faith to culture. And so that being an emphasis of some of the things I'm passionate about, seeing some of that lived out well, and some of the staff that we've had here and some of them grow in that way has been a real blessing for me.
Yeah, very, very well said and sharp. I'm just going to ask one quick follow-up if you're okay with that, and then I'll let you jump in there.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think it's really interesting because, you start this story by saying you're down in Tampa, things are good, you have a job down there, but now you have this calling to go to this camp. And at first it kind of just brushed off your shoulder, no big deal. Well, I'm probably just going to stay down in Tampa. But then it sounds like your urge to, once you really started thinking about it, to go to this camp grew more and more. And maybe this question will also lead a little bit into your testimony because you mentioned that word earlier, and everybody who's listening to this episode have already heard my testimony and John's testimony, but we'd love to hear yours as well. So my question is, why, amidst you searching and realizing that there is a brokenness in the Christian community, people are living this double standard where they're not really living out their faith, but they're calling themselves Christians and followers of Christ. Why was it so important for you specifically? Why was that weighing on your heart so much for you to try and make that difference? And again, maybe that'll lead a little bit into your testimony as well, because I'd love to explore your background on your faith in Christ.
Yeah, I mean, it does definitely tie into my testimony because I was raised to know who Jesus was from a young age, but my understanding of him and what and how he would care for and love the world around me was really something that grew and developed over time. I didn't have a strong sense of what that was. I think when I was younger, like I understood who Jesus in the Bible was in terms of the history of it, but I didn't really understand how he related to the world. And when I was growing up, I was born in 1990, so in the 90s and then especially in the 2000s, like in those eras as I was growing up, I didn't understand how he'd relate to the different things that were happening around me in my culture, whether it was with peers or things you'd read about in society, things that I saw in school, like all those sorts of things. In the sports arena, we'll talk about that obviously a good bit. I didn't understand how Jesus fit into all of that. The dichotomy of life is one of the toughest things, I think, to explain to people who maybe don't live for Christ or don't care necessarily about Jesus. But it's, the idea that Jesus wants to be Lord over everything in our life was something that was like, kind of blew my mind. I didn't really think about life that way until I was in college. When I was in church or when I was at Vacation Bible School and when I would do those kinds of things, like youth group as I got older, like, yeah, God was a part of those things. Like I understood what it looked like to worship him, to read the Bible. I knew that stuff. So the head knowledge was really there. I never really felt like there was a time in my life where I doubted whether Jesus was real or whether he cared about me or whether he wanted a relationship with me. Those things were all easy for me personally, not everybody, but for me personally to understand and to accept. I never feel like I really struggled with that part of it just in my personal journey. But how that looked like in a transformed life, what that looked like in terms of how I lived and treated other people, the words that I spoke, the way that I acted, how I engaged culture, how I engaged issues in our culture. I think all of those things were things that really expanded over time and ultimately, honestly, in a lot of significant ways, didn't even really take root and didn't really understand until after college. I would say the first couple years after college, a lot of that started taking root. So slow learner over here. So God had to just beat me over the head repeatedly with a lot of truth. And it still does, to be honest with you, to this day. But I think one of the key things was just type of experiences. You know, when I was growing up, grew up with a lot of like-minded, similar people. Whether you want to talk about very Caucasian spaces, whether you want to talk about very politically conservative spaces, and very Republican spaces. You know, those sorts of things, like even similar financial class, like middle to upper class, like that was a lot of like, so my life experiences and the way that I viewed and my perspective on life was shaped by a lot of those people. Very male centric leadership spaces. It was a lot of what I grew up, and really what everybody was growing up. That's changed a lot over the last 20 years, but that was like my experience with life, was like those were the norms. And so I saw life and sort of evaluated life through those prisms subconsciously. Like it wasn't like a conscious thing, but like that's how I thought about life. And that all filtered into my faith. Like my faith was all affected by that. I sort of thought, oh, I'm following Jesus. This is how I view life. This is how the people around me view life. A lot of them, most of them are following Jesus. Very Christian spaces too. I don't know if I mentioned that or if it was just obvious, but that was kind of my like background. Like was all of the, so like all of that, it just lacked diversity in every sense that you can imagine diversity. Like it just didn't have it. And so I saw the world very black and white. Like this was the way to live. Everybody that I knew and that I trusted and that was like a big part of my life pretty much saw things the same way. So thinking outside of that as to what else might be true, other experiences, other realities, other things that people gone through, perspectives on life, how even the country, how even patriotism could be viewed, how you name it. Like, and there were so many different things. I never saw another way to view them. I only saw them viewed through one lens. So as I got older, and especially as I went to college, and even the college experience for me was muted in that way. It was started, but it was still muted in that way. And then I worked at a juvenile detention facility right after I graduated college, and it didn't have anything to do with sports media. Which I would work a week. I would work like a Wednesday to Wednesday, and then I would work. Like I would be off a week basically, and from the facility, we would stay there for a week, and then we'd have a week off, and then we'd have a week on, and that's kind of how the schedule worked there. So in the weeks in between, I would broadcast high school football games and be doing my thing and writing where I could, and like all this kind of stuff. You know, just trying to get your foot in the door. In the meantime, you're trying to make some money, like in this juvenile detention facility. And so I'd work there. So
that's what that was. That was just a way for you to make money on the side. That's why you ended up taking that job.
A lot of it, I mean, but ultimately, Cal, a lot of it too was really like I knew there was something missing. Like there was a perspective in the world that I wasn't getting. And so like, yeah, to be along with, so some of it was the kids, and then also some of the people that I worked with there, their backgrounds, their experiences, where they come from. A lot of people from the inner city. For the first time, I worked like alongside, Black people, and I really got to like understand their perspective and how they saw the world and what their experiences were like in this country, and like how they viewed politics, how they viewed like all kinds of things that I just took for granted and didn't even think about. And so like that just kind of an example of when my perspective started to shift and change and expand to some degree as to what the world might look like. And so I started thinking about all these things, like how do most Christians I know talk about the subject of race? How do they even engage it? Like, do they recognize it as an issue? Racism is an issue in our culture. And I'm just giving you one example of the many things that like I started to think about from a Christ-like perspective for the first time. I never heard about anybody talk about racism from the pulpit. Like that never happened to me. Like I never thought that was an important thing that Christians care about. I thought that was a past thing, you know what I mean? And from my extremely white perspective, like that, yeah, why would I think about race? Like I'm part of the majority in almost every space that I was in. And so as soon as I was able to be in a space where I was a part of a minority, it challenged my way of thinking, where now it wasn't the norm necessarily to think how I thought. And that shook me up, and I was like, man, this is really interesting. So that started then, but then as I got in the media field, which thank God, is a very diverse space in the media, I think there's some of those reasons are very self-serving, but they have done a good job of expanding in that arena and being one of at the forefront of diverse hiring practices and things. So I got to work alongside like very diverse groups of people, and I got to become friends with, and I would go to events and cover sports with, and I started to hear perspectives and forge friendships. And if you want anything that blows up your perspective on life and expands the vision, go be friends with the types of people that you want to understand what they experience with, because as they hurt, you will hurt, just like scripture says we should, right? And so seeing a lot of that expanded my worldview to like in a massive way, while at the same time Christ was the core of it at all times. And so I really desired to see all of this stuff, everything I was experiencing and learning and seeing. I was alongside women who were trying to make their way in the media field, and I would see myself make a mistake, and I would see fans' response to that, and I would see them make a small mistake, and I would see fans' response to that. It'd be totally different. And for the first time, I was like, like women have a totally different experience than men do in this field. And of course, like that was reinforced by wasn't just one anecdotal observation, but it was many observations over time, watching how hard it was. And so, yeah, that changed my perspective. That changed how I would come alongside, right? That changed how I would love and listen to the experiences that were being had by women in my field. And so, and when I became somebody who could hire people, it became a priority and a focus of mine. I wanted our space to be diverse. I wanted diverse perspectives to shape what we did in media. Like that was a massive driver for me. I wanted to be able to give women a platform to be able to continue to do this at a high level and be able to work in the media space at a high level, because I knew the extra challenges that they faced because of the way that that much of society, especially those who consume, I will say all sports, but specifically football, can be watching fans like that for years. So all of these things just expanded my vision and gave me more perspective, which took years and years to develop. But it gave me more perspective, guys, on like what it looked like to actually live for Christ in this arena. Because for a while, I was just like, oh yeah, I'd live for Jesus in the spaces that I did. And then I went and did my media stuff. I went and did all my sports media stuff. And that was like my thing, right? I didn't have to like invite any type of Christian living process into that. There was no gospel living in that. The gospel living was for other times. Well, that's not what Jesus wants. He's a jealous God, as it says in the Bible. He wants all of us. He doesn't just want part of us. He wants everything of us. And so if part of our decision as Christians, if we're going to follow Christ, the Bible doesn't really say like there's like any halfway about it, right? Like you're going to deny yourself, pick up your cross and follow him. And sometimes we act like that should be easy. That's not easy. Like that should be something that's hard. So yeah, focusing on what I wanted each day at work, that would have been easy, but it was a lot harder in some ways to slow down my role, especially for me. I'm a very driven, ambitious person. And so for me, I had to learn through failure at some of the companies that I started over the years or was in higher positions at, doing and leading poorly, and God humbling me through that process sharpened me to be able to do that better in the future, because I was learning and he was teaching me, and ultimately he was drawing me to himself, and he was doing exactly what it talks about in Romans chapter 12, right? Do not be conformed to this world, which is what I was trying to do. I was trying to be in the rat race and be ambitious and do everything for myself, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's what he wanted from me. He wanted my perspective on everything to be able to change and be transformed over time. And it wasn't until he humbled me many, many times that I was able to start to see and to live and to eventually be someone who hired and cared for employees in that way. But it took a lot of failure for me to be able to see that.
There are probably 100 different follow-up questions I could ask.
Yeah, really. I know I'm rambling. I've tried a way to break this up.
No, I totally appreciate everything that you just said. And John, I want to let you have the floor as well, so I won't ask another question. But the one thing that I will say very quickly is, it's so fascinating to me because I would actually say that I grew up in a similar situation in which you did, where, it was a very privileged community and it was a very one race community, and everybody was exactly the same. And it was almost like this false utopia where, everything was great and, everybody had a nice house and it's right on Lake Erie and what have you. But for your experience in particular, it really sounds like going to this juvenile prison was a really big turning point for you to be able to gain that perspective. But also, you had to be the one to say, okay, out of all the different places that I could go to, I'm going to go here. And my first initial question to that was, why? And again, I'm not going to ask the question for you to answer, but maybe, one could speculate that is the wisdom of God calling upon you, and whether or not you will answer that call to accept his wisdom, but that wisdom being gaining the other perspectives and seeing how life is outside this bubble that you were in. And it seems like it has totally transformed your life. And that's the ascension that every person who follows Christ aspires to have, because we all say that we want to try to be better followers of Christ, but actually, ironically, a lot of what that is the selflessness that you were talking about, and learning those different perspectives and understanding how the world works aside from your viewpoint. I just think that was really, really great and a great testimony. So thank you for sharing. But John, John Sharp, I know you probably got a million things going through your head as well, and I want to let you have the floor. So fire away, man. What do you got?
Yeah, thanks for sharing, John, because I was thinking of questions and questions as you were going through that. But one thing that I really want to know, because you said you have this like mental like transformation of how you're viewing people, how you're seeing different cultures, different races. Everything, it seemed like you had a transformation of how you saw it. But now in sports media, a lot of people will know you just by your voice. You're talking, and people are listening to you. And now, how does your faith change like your language in sports? How does it change like how you're talking about different teams? Like, how did that transform how you started, speaking about your job?
Yeah, man. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story, and then I'll talk about how that leads to restoration. I'm sorry, this may take. I'm trying to tell you the short version, but maybe some people listening to this, if they've followed my story, they know this part. I don't know if you guys know it or have ever Googled it. No, it's out there, unfortunately, because it leads to the glory of God. But when I was at the Draft Network, which is a company I started a couple with Trevor Sekimo, who some people have probably heard of, works for Pro Football Focus now on NFL Network yesterday. He and I are been best friends, and so for a long time. And so when we started the Draft Network and kind of like started assembling that team, it grew really quickly. And I was one of the people basically in charge of that. I was the chief operating officer of that company. I'd never been in a role like that before. I saw our success skyrocket, top 7,000 visited website in the country in like a couple months. And I was like, this is everything that I dreamed. I dreamed of starting an NFL draft, a comprehensive NFL draft site my entire life. That was such a dream of mine. From the time I was a little kid, I was obsessed with the draft, literally like 6, 7 years old. I would read everything in a newspaper, and then the internet came along and everything. I could not get enough of NFL draft content. I knew every
So you love
prospect.
the movie Draft Day, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that movie left a lot to be desired, but yes, but definitely. But I was obsessed, like I really was, and so to be able to like look at my life and be for me like one of the pinnacles for me was going to be if I ever could start an NFL draft company and it became all the things I dreamed of since I was a kid. Like, what if there was a place that did all this stuff? And that was this world is my home. This would be my achievement. This is where my identity or my pride is in starting something like this. So when that started and when that took off, and when that was everything I had dreamed that it would be in terms of what the earth would consider, what the world would consider as success. And by the way, just to backtrack for a second, when I say the world, I want to be really careful because I think a lot of Christians say the world and they say all those people who aren't saved like me. And it's kind of like all the people, it's like a lower level of people when they talk about the world. That's not what I mean. What I mean is there's people who have had their perspective changed by Jesus, not because of anything they've done, but only because of what Jesus has done. And then there is also culture that is outside of that. Whereas why would you change what you do and the goals and priorities that you have if you don't recognize Jesus as Lord, right? It wouldn't make any sense for me to put Jesus first, others second, I am third, as we talk about at Summer's Best 2 Weeks, if I didn't even believe in Jesus. Why would I put others second? Like, I should put myself, you know what I mean? Like, and the benefit of others would be a nice thing, but it wouldn't make any sense in terms of a way to live. And so when I say the world, I just want to be clear. I'm not talking about like people who just don't get it and then Christians get it. Like, not at all. Like, what I'm talking about is that the perspective that comes from putting Jesus first in your life because of what Jesus has done for you does dramatically shape and reprioritize sort of like what you care about and how you care about it in life. And so for me, like when I was thinking about like success and what it looked like from an earthly sense, that was what it was. Like, it was achieving this kind of stuff. And so as that started to happen and I saw that success begin to happen, it became an obsession. Like, I had to continue to pour and pour in and pour in and pour in. And long story short, as that was happening, I was emptying the clip and exhausted and depressed and all that kind of stuff. Even though the company was thriving and everything I wanted was happening, it wasn't bringing me the joy that I thought it would. And so I was frustrated with God about that. Like, I was like, "What? This is what we had talked about." No, that's what I talked to him about. He listened, but he didn't necessarily see it the same way I did. And as all this was happening, someone got mad at a football take that I had at some point during the day on social media, and they found things that I had said when I was younger on social media, or that my friends had logged into my account. Back when Facebook and Twitter were first things, we didn't think about anybody ever seeing the things that we said. People just logged in and said, we logged to each other's accounts all the time in college and said goofy things. And some of those things were actually beyond goofy. They were hurtful, they were racist, they were homophobic, and some of those things have been said from my accounts, and some of those things I had even said from my accounts. I had no memory of that at that point in time in which all this stuff started to come out, but that sort of blew up. They hacked into our actually company account and retweeted some of that stuff, and so a lot of that stuff started to blow up as that happened. And myself, I didn't even remember a lot of these things being the case, but I had this unique experience. It was awful, obviously, at the time, but it was mostly awful because a lot of people who'd followed me for years were really hurt by things that I'd said in the past, and they were like, why'd you say this? Why was this your perspective? And there was a lot of questioning, and that happened. And there was a lot of, basically at that point, I realized I had a choice. Like on social media, as all this was happening, there were people who'd followed me for a long time who were really defending me, and they were, this stuff isn't even a big deal. He was younger when he said this. Like, none of that stuff matters. You know what I mean? Like, who cares? Like, words are words. And like they were defending me, saying that kind of stuff. Well, I didn't agree with their perspective. I did think it was a big deal. There were people on the other side who thought he's racist, he's homophobic, he's all these sorts of things. And my perspective on that was, why wouldn't they think that? They don't know me. Like, they know my football takes, they know my sports takes. They have no reason to believe that I wouldn't be those things, and I've given them evidence to believe that I am those things based on things that I'd said and done in the past. And so I certainly knew myself, but I also knew that I'd made huge mistakes and I'd really hurt people. And so I had this weird experience of being like confronted with your own sin. I always think like, someday, like, what if we could see all our sin laid out before us, and then we see Jesus wipe it all clean and take it all away? Like the wildest range of emotion ever, right? Like right in front of you. I got like a tiny snippet of that, knowing that I was forgiven by him, but also seeing like how much I'd hurt, like my past sin, like kind of like boom, right there in front of me, literally typed out. And to this day, it can be Googled and looked at. And so, it sucks. It was awful. But it was also like an opportunity. Like, and once I could kind of like calm down from the madness of it all, God just was like, man, you have an opportunity to be able to speak on these things. These are topics that Christians engage so poorly, like probably more poorly over the years than anything else. And there's a stereotype of Christians when it comes to these topics that exists for a reason. And I've seen it. I've been at the forefront of seeing that in church and growing up. And it's why I had a lot of the perspectives that I had, and why I thought it was okay to say and use a lot of the words that I said, because there wasn't proper, like I wasn't given a proper understanding of what it looked like to engage any of these things in a Christ-like way. And so as I had that opportunity, one of the things I had a chance to be able to do was to say, hey, like, I need to, like, you guys need to, at the company, like, need to suspend me for a while. Like, we need to make sure we make a statement that this is a big deal. And they did that. And eventually a bunch of things went into it that I won't get on all the details, but as I was away from the company, ended up being a situation where I was leaving the company after a month. And before I left, I had the opportunity to make a video and to be able to publish a video of me talking about these issues. And so I talked for about 7-8 minutes about these issues and how I felt like we should engage them as Christians, as human beings in the world, why they mattered, why it was a big deal, the words that I used, why words are a big deal and do matter. I mean, James literally talks about it over and over again. Jesus didn't care about words. Like, think about everything this dude said. Like, he carefully chose every word that he said. He carefully chose every response that he said. He absolutely cared about words. He cared about how people were treated. And he cared about people with different worldviews were treated. And he intentionally engaged with and spent time with those people. And he challenged the church. That was who Jesus challenged. He came, challenged and changed the people in the synagogue. Like, that's who he challenged. Like, he was challenging the religious leaders of the time. And certainly there are times when Jesus is challenging someone in the midst of their sin that's outside of that wouldn't believe in him. But like, he was challenging the people who grew up closest to the Old Testament, closest to the scripture, closest to understanding who the Messiah was going to be. Like, it was those people that he challenged and spent the most. So like, yeah, for me as a Christian, like that, like actually reflecting on the testimony of Jesus, I realized I had an opportunity to be able to talk about and engage people who their experience of Jesus and their experience of the people who loved and followed Jesus had been what I'd done and said in the past. That was their experience. So to them, when they saw that stuff, they were just like, yeah, I'm not even surprised. Like another Christian that says and does these things, but talks about loving people, but also like talks about people from underprivileged people groups and minority people groups this way. And so I had an opportunity to sincerely apologize for those things, but also to take a couple minutes to teach and just talk about why I thought those things were super important and why I thought people do it. The words we say do matter, and the way we treat people do matter. And because it all is a connotation of what our perspective is, right? If we minimize words and we minimize the ways we talk about people, then we minimize the people. Like they can't have one without the other. From out of the everything that happens in the heart, the mouth speaks, the Bible says, basically. And so that's what we're feeling inside when those things happen. And so it was really important for me to make that clear, I think, in the video, and that was Christ working in me. There was nothing else. Like it wasn't like I just suddenly wised up and realized what would be the smart thing to say. Jesus just worked on my heart. He just convicted me of those things, and he made me like genuinely passionate about those things and genuinely care about those things. And it was just amazing to see a transformation. I had not grown up, and I never thought, oh, I'm going to care really passionately about this stuff. Like I just barely even thought about it. I just said and did whatever I wanted as it related to those topics, and I wasn't transformed. When you talk about the transformed by the renewing of your mind, it starts in your head. Like, how do you understand and even think about and engage these things? How educated are you on these things? So I poured myself into the education process. I had already been doing that before that happened, and I had started to become more outspoken on these things even before that happened, but that gave me even more of a nobody listens until something like that happens, and then something like that happens. They're like, oh, actually now he's talking. Now we remember why he's talking, and so now they start to listen. And so God gave me an opportunity, a platform to be able to do that. And even though it was a really painful thing to go through, and obviously it's awful to have that kind of exposed to the world, I think in a lot of ways, it was also like a testimony, a big part of my testimony, a big reminder of like my reliance is in Christ, and ultimately my joy is in Him, and everything I'd been trying to build. Yeah, like I had to leave the Draft Network, the company that I dreamed of starting. I was so burnt out from it anyway that part, honestly, at the time felt like a relief. I wasn't even getting joy from what I'd found. But yeah, my perspective had been this world is my home, and my actions and the way that I led at the Draft Network and a lot of things had suggested this world is my home and this is what I care about. And that's just not true as Christians. Like the part of living the transformed life is that I don't believe this world is my home, and I don't believe that it's ultimately all about me. And I don't believe I can live my best life right now on this life. I believe that's in life to come. And so ultimately that should change my entire perspective, because now it's not about me. It's about Jesus and drawing close to Him. And as I draw close to Him, it's about everything horizontal, right? How do my relationships with other people, how does it transform? How does my vertical relationship with Jesus transform my horizontal relationship with other people? And as I started to think about what that looked like, and that became priority, like it was amazing what God was able to do to me as I went through the process of unpacking all of that, and then eventually at the next stop that I had in media, as God did give me another opportunity to do that, which is another cool part of the testimony. But that, to answer your question, John, is really like when you talk about what shaped and changed the way that I spoke and the way that I understood why words mattered, why the way that I treated people mattered. It was God humbling me through the midst of my own sin and my brokenness, and in my weakness, He is strong, right? As it says in Scripture. And so that was a big part of my testimony. I was somebody who was caring about building this brand and this image, and God had other plans. So He humbled me, and through my humbling, Christ was made much of, I believe, and it's been an unbelievable blessing. I've had so many people reach out. I've had people that speak in schools to people about why we use certain words, why we don't, and all of this, the whether it's diversity and inclusion conversations, those sorts of things, which can be really good, productive conversations, and have not been at certain times. But I've known so many people who've led those discussions, who are part of organizations that go into schools and go into workplaces, talk about those sorts of things, and they've reached out to me to let me know they've used my video to be able to show people some of the key points of that thing, which is like unbelievable, because that's nothing I've done. That's just Jesus speaking through me, and part of a transformed life. Again, like that's all because of the sanctification process of what He's doing in my life. And so yeah, those have been such humbling experiences to me to have people reach out and let me know that, and how it shaped their perspective and how they've changed the way they've spoke. Like that just never happens without God using my sin and my brokenness to make much of Him. And so to be able to that kind of stuff, when you see God show up that way, it transforms how you live moving forward. And so it's a huge part of my testimony that He was able to work in my life in the way He did. I'm sorry, it's a very long story, but it's also one that has to be told, I think, if we're going to talk about this stuff.
No, that was awesome, because I was going
Yeah.
to ask, like, once all that, resurfaced, and people couldn't tell the transformation you were going through at that point, the way you were viewing people and how you were approaching your work. Did you ever hear from any of those people after you made that video? And you said, like, to this day, people are still going back to that video and
Yep.
using that as a foundation for their own faith. Did that ever come back to any of those people that resurfaced those late posts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were mixed responses from those people. There are a variety of folks, and I think some did reach out and were like, "Hey, we shouldn't have done that," and some, but ultimately, for me, it was really like there were opportunity. People reached out to me like, "Hey, we found posts from these people. Do you want us to publish that?" Like people were on my side. They're like, "Hey, we found things they said. Do you want to fight fire with fire?" And I was just like, "Absolutely not. Like that's not what this is about at all. Like let those things stay dead and buried. They've got to. Those are between them and God. But for me, like this was an opportunity. Like I just needed to repent. That was my main focus and all of that. And so it's something that doesn't really leave you. Necessarily. Like it's been years since that happened. A lot of that happened in 2018. In 2019 really was around the time that happened. It was actually the spring of 2019. And so those things don't necessarily like totally leave. Like I said, they're on the internet once in a while. There's still like comments and things here and there. I don't ever hide that part. It comes to a point in your testimony where you don't necessarily, I'm not going to talk about those things every day on social media, but I don't ever hide that part of my story. It is part of my story. If, people want to bring it up, like God, there's, plenty of evidence of God's working in my life, which I'm grateful for. But, ultimately to me, it's not necessarily about proving anything to anybody about me, but it's about using the opportunities I have to be able to continue to expand the gospel, like and what the gospel actually looks like as it relates to culture and life, not what people's common understanding of it is. And so I try to take advantage of those opportunities when they come. I am on my Substack. I think most people know what I've done. When I was at Pewter Report and covering the Bucks in Tampa Bay, I was pretty honest about those things when they came up. I was able to talk about those things pretty freely. But over time, I think people have mostly forgiven, and that I've been grateful for that. And there's some that probably won't, but maybe that takes longer. And ultimately, that's totally understandable to me. Like I can't imagine being one of the people in the one of people in the groups of people that I spoke about the way that I once did, and what that would be like to see that, especially from somebody you respected. I know there were people that felt that as well. So there is also the consequences part. Like that's the part that we think about. We can just get scot-free of as Christians. We don't. Like this, there are consequences in this life and the next. And so, for those who aren't saved, but in this life, there are consequences to the decisions that we make. And I think one of those consequences for me was, some of that stuff in terms of reputation, and also, in terms of platform. Like I left the Draft Network, and I honestly thought I was never going to get back into sports media again. And that summer, I spent my first summer at Summer's Best 2 weeks, and I helped out there. And I was, I was still part owner of the Draft Network, and so that was something that was like, should I get back into media? Like, is that ever going to happen for me? Should I go another route? And one of the things I really explored was starting a gap year program for college age students to kind of continue to educate them on these sorts of things. So I thought Christians, again, young adults, Christian leaders, to come and be having a year where before they started college, they could a lot of like, how do we engage culture? How do we engage topics like race and sexuality and like all of these things as Christians? Like, what is the proper Christ-like biblical perspective? How do we engage people who may have a different opinion or a different perspective or a different way of doing these things in and out of the church? Like, and so that was one of my dreams at the time. COVID hit shortly after that. And so no gap year program was starting in the midst of COVID. We didn't even know if we'd be able to be around each other. And the Bucks job came up, and I was able to take that job in Tampa Bay. And, we can see if we get into that story necessarily, but God gave me opportunities to lead in a much better, more Christ-like way than I did when I was at the Draft Network there. And as much as I had the consequences of the things that I did wrong at the Draft Network, I've seen the blessings of how God's used me since the time at Pewter Report, and a lot of the relationships with people that I was able to hire and help develop there, and ultimately become close friends with, and in some ways mentor. And that's been just an unbelievable blessing from God to be able to to see it that way.
That's such a great story. And John, you kind of present this like classical narrative of the main character having something that goes really well for him, but then he has this catastrophic moment where he has to learn. And one of the things that, I mean, you've said the word a few times now throughout this podcast, but one of the things that has to happen in order for us to learn is we have to humble ourselves before God, right? To receive his blessing, we have to be enough, we have to be wise enough to humble ourselves before him. I'm reading then to Job right now, and one of the narratives of Job is, everything gets taken away from him after he has everything he could imagine. He's got the status, he's got the wealth, he's got his family, all of it wiped out. And at the beginning, when everything is wiped out, he says, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. But then his perspective on it kind of changes throughout the book, and he gets a little bit more prideful, and he's searching for why this happens, and he can't find an answer. And so it comes to a point where he's like, I haven't done anything wrong, and God is punishing me. And then this prophet, I believe you pronounce it, is it Elihu? Am I saying that right?
I think it is, yeah, or Elihu, maybe. I've heard.
Elihu, yeah. Well, so he comes along and he says, Job, God isn't answering your prayers right now. He's hearing them, but he's not answering them because your pride is getting in the way. And I think it just reminded me of your story because you said, you had this opportunity to where you were in a bad spot. You feel like you screwed up, but you still had to humble yourself before God to allow yourself to make that video, which then consequently leads you into your transformative property. And I'm just curious, what allowed you to humble yourself? What do you think it was that was like, you know what? I really am wrong here. I'm going to put my own perspective aside and Jesus, do what you will with me.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, just totally Jesus. Like, there's nothing else. Like, that's literally just it. Like, I mean, I would never would. If it wasn't for him, I would still be probably at the Draft Network, still, fighting my own battles, doing exactly the things I do, trying to make this world my home, trying to build my kingdom here on earth, trying to store up my treasures on earth, like all that kind of stuff. Like that was, it's only Jesus' intervention that, the wisdom thing you talk about is amazing, but it all comes from God. Like Solomon literally asked for it. Jesus is like, you can have anything. He's like, I just want to have wisdom. Like that's all I'm trying to have. Like I see, like that's the one thing that can change. Is the one thing that can transform was when you have wisdom from God, and like that's what he wanted. And like, that should be me. Like that should be my focus as well. Is just like, that's the only thing I desire, is because in that process of gaining wisdom, you just draw closer to the Lord. Like wisdom will always lead you closer to the Lord. There's a reason Proverbs talks about it over and over and over again. Wisdom is always the thing that will draw you closer and closer to the Lord. And so as you gain wisdom, you gain insight and understanding into who God is. And as you gain insight and understanding who God is, like any relationship that you spend time with and understand, you draw closer and closer to that person, right? You trust that person more. You give that person more. You rely on that person more. Your hope is in that person more. And for a person, that would be really dangerous because people in your life are meant to share it, not be it. And so they're not meant to hold you up, but Jesus does. And so like it's a totally different story when you're talking about Jesus, because he's bringing it in a way no person ever could. And so he's not going to let you down. And so when that happens, that's what it looks like to live a transformed life. Now you're living a life that says Jesus is the number one thing and everything that I have is his. And so when you can get to that point, and obviously easier said than done, and that's a battle I'll fight every day. And rich young ruler went away sad, it says in the Bible. I love that like line. He just went away sad. Like he'd done all these right things. He'd lived this like unbelievably upright moral life. I followed all the commandments. I've been in church every day since I was a kid. I know everything it says in the Old Testament. Like I know the golden rule. I know all this stuff. Like I know the first commandment, the second commandment, all of it. Jesus is like, all right, give up everything you have and follow me. Like, and the young man went away sad because he couldn't do it. Those things meant more to him ultimately. And so I don't want to live life that way. But given to my own devices without the intervention of Christ, I would ultimately choose that because of my sin. So it's only through his intervention that I'm saved, and it's only through his intervention that I continue to draw close to him. It's because he just won't leave me, even how many times I screw up, and how many times I get it wrong, and how many times I let my pride come first. He just won't freaking leave me. Like he just won't. And so it's sort of a beautiful tale, and it goes back to what we're talking about, lost sheep parable, and that even people maybe who don't know Jesus who are listening to this talk about it as like he's just not going to let you get away. Like he just ain't. He's always going to come back for you, and like that's the only thing in my life that I've had that's happened in that way. Like, as much as I love my wife and as great as she is, and the people I've been blessed with in my life have been so amazing, but Jesus is the only one coming back over and over and over again, no matter what I do, that just says, yeah, it's already been forgiven. It's already been forgiven. And the fact that that's out there for anybody who's want to believe that is really a testimony to how powerful and how great he is. And so if there are people listening that like maybe don't know who he is, like, my story is just one, but there's so many like it, of people that Jesus works in this way in their life. And so, yeah, for me, I think just seeing that has been the main thing that's led to a continued process of being humble, of being able to, that's still the struggle. It's always the struggle, but being able to have my eyes wide open, I think, to what Jesus is doing in my life and how he's working. And literally everyday occurrences, everyday things that happen. Just how can I have a Christ-like perspective? How can I see everything he's doing in my life as not an accident or coincidence, but something that he's doing that's designed to the number one thing, the only thing he cares about, draw me close to him ultimately. And then from that will come everything else, right? From that, the horizontal stuff we talk about with relationships with other people, the transformed life for myself individually, all of those things will come. But first, I have to draw close to him. And so he's using everything. Talk about Job. Suffering is a huge part of it, right? Yeah. Why does suffering happen? People wrestle with that. It's not God. Like, God didn't create the world with that in mind, like where he was like, yeah, so we're going to make everybody suffer. But when we sin, suffering came into the world. And so as a result of that, what's he going to do? Well, he's not going to let suffering not bring glory to him. So he'll use even suffering to draw glory to him, to draw us to himself. He'll use even pain to draw us to himself and bring glory to him. Nothing's not going to do that at the end of the day. Like, everything will bring him glory. And so ultimately, that's the life that I want to be about. But yeah, without the intervention of Christ, that just wouldn't happen for me.
Yeah, and you could say that moment for you was your spiritual awakening, if you will. That's where you had to bear your cross and really choose. Okay, I'm gonna follow Jesus in this scenario and not my own desire. And you mentioned this battle that goes on now, and you said it's a battle every day, even after you had that revelation for yourself, and even after that video came out. So how is that transition? What does that battle look like for you today? And of course, you're doing the stuff with Tampa Bay, and I know you have your own website. If you want to plug that in as well, just so people know what it is. What does that battle look like for you on a day-to-day basis now?
Yeah, I think it's really, if like most of that, honestly, for a while I was like, oh, I'm going to write about this stuff and I'm going to tweet about it and I'm going to like, that's going to be my battleground to like continue to spread awareness of these things. No, it's not. Because anybody who's ever, I mean, sometimes being able to write in podcasts, certainly, and say things on my podcasts and writings, I'm not going to act like that hasn't been something that's mattered or something that's helped in the past. But I do think the biggest thing for me, honestly, has been in my actual human, like my life, like where my feet are, not online, not any of those places, but just like actually like where I live, the people in my community, the people I work with in a physical sense, like who are the people in my life? Because ultimately I can say lots of things on social media, say anything on Twitter, and you're just going to get people fighting and killing each other in the mentions. You can't have a good actual dialogue about these things, which need to be dialogued about. And you can't do that in 240 characters. So I found I abandoned completely talking about these things on social media. And to some people, they would be like, well, you still need to use your platform. No, I want to engage in people in my community, people I have a relationship with, so that when I say something, they know I'm not just trying to yell at them, or what people on social media like to say, virtue signaling. They know I'm not trying to do those things. What I'm trying to do is actually help them understand a perspective and a view of life that they probably haven't engaged before. And so that has been a big part of my personal life on a day-to-day basis, decisions I make and choices I make, conversations I have. And I can't even tell you guys, I don't even know where to begin to talk about how blessed I've been. Pastors in this community that have, never engaged with, never talked about race from the pulpit, never talked about sexuality from the pulpit, never talked about some of the issues in our culture from the pulpit, either avoided them or had very like one-sided narrow view of those things, and very traditional Christian, conservative. I'm currently live and moved to from Tampa, where I was in a super diverse, multicultural, like all these perspectives, like political perspectives, all of it. Here where I live now is like very Republican, very conservative, very white, very traditional, like, as John's laughing because he knows this area a little bit. He's been here, but that's where I live now. And I knew exactly where I was going to. That wasn't lost to me. I knew the area I was stepping into, and I knew the things I were passionate about would be very countercultural to people in this area. And so it's not something you can go away from almost any day that you're here. It is something that you're going to have the choice whether to step up and say something, whether to make it a focus, to make it part of your daily interaction or conversation or teaching moment. And I've been so encouraged. I mean, there have been so many people, even in the church that I'm a part of, which, yes, like extremely like patriotism. Did I mention that one? That goes hand in hand with everything. So like nationalism, Christian nationalism is a thing here. Like that is something that I think is a massive problem in our culture and in our country. And so the opportunity to speak and gently educate people and talk about those things is here. This is where that battleground is. And so I have to be careful about as I engage those things of not being like, oh, I'm the guy who's always right, you're always wrong, because then you lose people. You won't actually hear, people won't actually be, you won't ever actually earn the right to be heard by anyone at that point. They'll just think, oh, you're stuck up, you think you don't understand us. You have to be able to engage these people, build relationships, not because they're a cause for you or anything like that, but because you actually care about people and you desire to help people grow and to build a relationship with people and all of those sorts of things. And so for me, that was just a massive part of coming here is how do I build relationships with people? How do I come alongside them? So everything from meeting with the pastors at the church that I go to, literally getting lunch with them, talking about them, introducing them to the literature, having them read books that they never thought they would open up and read, having other Christian leaders in our community open up and read books they never thought they would read. I mean, if you can get Christian leaders in an area like this to open up the book White Fragility, even if I'm not saying everything in the book White Fragility is gospel, and I'm not, but if you can get them to open up that book and get educated and even start to think about, okay, I'm reading this book, which so many Christians are just like scared to even open. What if it just like is so of the devil? Open it, engage with the literature, engage with the messages. And you may not agree with everything in it. I'm not saying I agree with everything in it, but it helped me think about things. Everything when it's taken back to Scripture and Scripture first. Like, what does the Bible say about things? Is there any truth? Can I find something that I'm reading? Does it compel me to search through Scripture and does that change my perspective on anything? For me, it was really helpful to look back at my history and be like, some of the things in even a book like that, I'm like, man, yeah, these were things my grandparents said that did shape my view of things. Like these were things that were subconsciously like messaged to me and that did shape my view on things. I can't speak for everybody and say I had that experience, but just getting Christians to engage in this stuff, to think about this stuff, to wonder about what it looks like to engage our culture in some of these different ways, to challenge themselves to think about their own viewpoint. How is maybe your own viewpoint's broken and you've never examined it. You know what I mean? You've never thought about it in terms of those things. And so just getting some of those conversations to start happening, being able to be a part of those conversations, having pastors that want to meet and hear, and I'm asking them questions and trying to gain understanding. I need to know and understand, what is it like for people in this area? What matters to them? How can I connect with them? How can I build a relationship? How can I love and care for them? Like all of those things, that's what it looks like, the kingdom of God working together to love people and care for people well. Like we're not going to not challenge people, but we're not going to say everything they're doing. We're not going to attack them either. You know what I mean? Like I want to challenge people in this area, but I also want to love them. I don't want to make them feel attacked. I don't want to make them feel dumb. I don't want to make them feel uneducated. And a lot of people are, that can be something they feel when you start talking like that. There's a defensiveness to it. Like, you're going to take what I know and, use it against me basically. And I don't want to come across that way. So there's a subtlety to it. When Paul did this, right? You think about Paul, remember when he talked about in Athens, the altar to the unknown God, right? He's like, this altar to the unknown God. He could have easily been like, you freaking idiots. Like the altar to an unknown God, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. The real God has been there the whole time. Jesus walked, these streets, you've seen some of his teachings and like you've seen his miracles. You guys missed it completely. What did Paul say though? He said, this altar to unknown God you all been praying to, actually, I know who that is. Like, do you want to hear about him? Like, I actually know what you're looking for. Like, you actually been seeking the right thing. You've been seeking like something really good. You've just been a little confused as to what that is. And I'm just going to help tweak and guide your vision, right? He didn't come at their neck. He didn't come at them in hate. He didn't come at them in ridicule or anything. He wanted them to understand the way you approach is so important, right? He wanted to earn the right to be heard. So he came in gently and softly. He's admirable to a lot of the things that they've been teaching. He did the same thing when he wrote to the church in Rome, Jews and Gentiles, right? He could easily said, Jews, you fools, like, what in the world's wrong with you? You don't think this for the gospel is for the Gentiles? Instead, what did he say? He's like, you've had your faith in Abraham and in his teachings, and I'm here to because you thought Abraham was saved by his own righteousness. Abraham wasn't saved by his own righteousness, but I understand why you thought that. Abraham was saved by faith. And here's what it actually looks like. So he used what Keller talks about this before he passed, talked about this a lot. How do we find overlapping values with people who believe and have a different worldview or perspective than us? Where can we find overlapping values? Can we start there? Right, Paul, I also am a Jew. I also believed in Abraham. You know what I mean? He found overlapping values with the people and then he challenged, right? So he established camaraderie and then he challenged in the way that he approached. I believe in Abraham too. Like, I just think your perspective on Abraham and what the Old Testament means in terms of who Abraham was, you see him as this person who was saved because he was so righteous. I'm actually here to tell you Abraham was unrighteous and he was saved because of his faith. That's why he was saved, because of something that had been done for him that he had faith in, or it was going to be done for him, faith in the promise that God had made for him. Like, that's why he was saved. He wasn't saved because he was so great. And so, like, the opportunity to like find those overlapping values, that's ultimately what we're called to do. Can you find the overlapping values, and then can you argue and articulate and challenge from that position where you've established camaraderie? And so when we talk about witnessing, or we talk about caring for people, a lot of the time we talk about that as outside of the church. How do we go to people and evangelize? But in my experience and watching the example of Jesus, I think a lot of that was in the church. The people who actually needed to experience and know what it was like to be in a relationship with Jesus are often the people that are closest to it physically, like in terms of, or even verbally, in terms of what they believe and say they believe. But the relationship part and the transformation that comes from relationship with Jesus actually hasn't been experienced. Because if you know Jesus and you actually believe and live in the transformed life that the Bible talks about, it can't not matter in your real life. You know, I've used this example talking to camp, but I'm a diehard Steelers fan and grew up a diehard Steelers fan. I could tell you guys I'm a Steelers fan, but if you followed up and asked me questions like, oh, what do you think about Russell Wilson? And I was like, who's Russell Wilson? Like, what do you think about TJ Watt? Do you think he should have been Defensive Player of the Year? And like, what do you think about, did he have a down year? And I was like, TJ Watt, I don't know who that is. Why would he have a down year? Like, you know what I mean? If all these things, how in the world you would never believe that I was a Steelers fan. If I didn't know any of the players, I didn't know the stats, I hadn't watched the games, I didn't know the results, I didn't have a jersey, I didn't have anything. Like, nothing in my life suggested that I was a Steelers fan. There's no way I could actually be one unless my life indicated that I was one. That's the only way you'd believe it. And so it's the same thing with us as believers. Like, if our life doesn't indicate that the Bible doesn't say like, oh yeah, this is fun and cute and you can do it on the side. It was a whole life thing. Like, you got to commit everything. And so like, that's, well, you see that, right? In the way people live, like when they live a transformed life, that's what happens. And so, yeah, the response that like people in the church often are the people furthest from understanding that because they think they're close. And so they kind of miss it. And so that's why Jesus did his ministry the way that he did. And that's where he challenged the most, I think, was because of that. And so for me, that is a testimony of Jesus did it that way. That's probably a pretty good way for me to do it. And so a lot of times for me, it's engage and build relationships with non-Christians. And if there comes an opportunity and a time to speak into their life and to share what I believe with them, awesome. Like, I love that. But for people who actually already say they believe the same thing as me, I got tons of opportunity. You know what I mean? Like, you already say you believe the same thing as me. Like, I'm not beating you over the head with it. I'm just telling you what it actually looks like to be lived out. And I don't have all the answers, but these are things Jesus is just revealing to me and teaching me so that I can continue to go into the church and continue to go into body believers and share what he's taught me through my own brokenness and sin. And they're going to do the same thing with me, by the way. Like, there's going to be brokenness and sin they've experienced that I haven't, that I need to be made aware of by them. And so that's what it looks like when everybody's working in community together as believers. But it sort of starts with that understanding that like this is the group of people you're engaged in. So in terms of how it plays out in my life now, Kyle, it really is like a lot of boots on the ground stuff, hardly any media stuff. I mean, I talk about it on the podcast when it comes up and it's pertinent in media, or there's something to speak about as it relates to media, or you know, there are certainly times where that has been the case. But I would say the vast majority of that happens for me, like literally where my feet are, my wife and I being involved in our community, especially be involved in our church, and specifically here with the people I work with at Summer's Best 2 Weeks. And, you know, we come from different backgrounds and different amounts of understanding and engagement with this type of stuff. So helping to educate that part, being that part of our policies at camp and how we shape our language and the way that we deal with camper issues and parent issues and all of that stuff matters. And even something like whether there was a time at Summer's Best 2 Weeks where we shaved facial hair, you know, like we had our counselor shave, and it was understood, like we wanted people to be well kempt, like that was just a way to establish a standard so all the guys on camp don't just grow like little stashes every time the parents are coming to drop with their kids. Well, now we have to explain why all the guys at our staff think it's cool to mustaches. Let's just scrap the whole thing and let's just say we're not doing facial hair. Well, if you know something about the background of people of color, a lot of the time it can be really unnerving for them to part with their facial hair for something like that, and it can be a big part of their identity. And so one of the things we talked about as a staff, that I just, from being educated, from having conversations with people, I was able to say, hey, I think this actually might hurt our ability to add diversity to our staff if we do it that way. And the people I work with were unbelievable. They were like, that is such a good reason for, like, that is a good enough reason for us to, like, work with different types of people who might have a different, want to make their facial hair look a certain way and things like that. And I was just like, man, it's so cool to be a part of a group of believers that like sees it and is challenged by that. I never thought about that, but here's, what we should. And it was just like cool because I never thought about it. And so cool, we were able to make that policy change, and like now that was huge. We've had, so last year we had our most diverse summer staff I think that they've ever, since I've known about camp, at least, that they've had, or at least in some time. And so cool to be able to be a part of those sorts of things. Like that's moving closer to what the kingdom of God is supposed to look like. And so that's what restoration, when you talk about that, we haven't talked about that a ton yet, but like the result of living a transformed life is that you believe this world is not your home and there's a better one to come. And part of that is what Jesus talks about in Romans 8, talks about restoration and creation groaning, hoping for something more. That's what he's talking about, restoration. So how can we be a part of the restoring of creation closer to what God's original design for creation was, before sin to enter the world? Because someday he's going to come again and he's going to say, like, all right, we're back, baby, and it's going to be a restored world. And so how do we continue to draw people close to him? How do we continue to work toward that and excellence in everything that we do, and doing it all for the glory of God? And like that's ultimately what I think a lot of life looks like now for me.
Yeah, I love that idea of finding that common ground with different perspectives and different viewpoints, because that's the love that Jesus wants us to show others, right? Because we're not all going to think the same. And I really appreciate what you said. And hey, I mean, we were able to find some common ground too. You're a Steelers fan. Sharp and I are both Browns fans. So I mean, you'd think we should hate each other, but hey,
I mean, both of our outlooks are
having a great time.
The outlooks for both of our fan bases are just so miserable right now. You guys were like the worst cap situation in the world, and this whole Watson mess, and the Steelers are like hopelessly stuck in the middle and just no hope of ascending. It's a dismal time for both franchises.
Yeah, and did Tomlin go? Did I read that right? Is he gone?
No, he's there. He's there still. Don't get my hopes up, Kyle. I love Tomlin. I mean, the history I love. It's been time for something new, and that's been a big shtick of mine as an analyst for a long time. As longtime listeners, if they're listening to this, will know. I've seen the writing on the wall with this Tomlin thing, I think, for a lot longer than I wish I had.
Don't take him for granted, man. If the Browns could find a head coach that lasted 30, 40 years, I'd be jumping for joy. So do not take him for granted. You got a Super Bowl with him, so there's something to celebrate in there. But Sharp, what do you got?
Yeah, so you talked about, your staff this year at Summer's Best 2 Weeks being like the most diverse staff that you've had. And, I had a perspective change myself. It was about 2 years ago, and when Kyle and I were going to the same church at this time, the city in Ashtabula, and it's pretty diverse community there. And I was talking to someone at the church, and they're like, yes, I love this church so much because of its diversity. And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, that person said, because this is what the kingdom of God's going to look like one day. And I blew my mind, opened my mind up so much. And I was like, I want to keep coming here. Like, this is amazing, because there's people of all different socioeconomic statuses, different races, ethnicities, all different backgrounds. And I thought that was amazing. Now, I'm curious, because you said you had a pretty amazing experience in Tampa, and it sounds like, the way Summer's Best 2 Weeks is going, you're really transforming that. So I would love to hear those different experiences in Tampa, and then how maybe you're instilling that into your campers today.
Yeah, so the camper part is really interesting. I'll go back to Tampa first and then talk about the camper part, because those conversations are, talk about formative. Those kids are ages 8 to 18. So they're even in some ways more formative, and the first time for many of them they're ever being challenged on some of these things. Actually, let me start with the camper thing, because it'll help me. I'll backtrack. But it was interesting. Even this summer, and obviously I'm not going to use names, but there was a camper who they made this is very common. Like kids ages 8 to 18 they come from lots of different types of families, but there are certainly a demographic. I will not pretend like these are all of our kids. These are not all of our kids that come during the summer, but there certainly is a demographic of upper class kids that come from a lot of privilege. And some of the stereotypes that come with that are true. I hate to paint people with a broad brush ever, and I don't think it's just helpful, generally speaking. But some of the stereotypes of that are true, and we do see that play out at sometimes in certain campers, I think, at times. And that's fine. That's part of what the kingdom of God looks like too. And we need to be able to speak to those people as well and help them. It's all about how can we come alongside of each other and help increase our understanding of what brokenness looks like. Because if we can accept and look at our own brokenness, then our view of God gets way bigger, right? Because he's the only thing that can heal our brokenness, that can save us from our brokenness. And so with these kids, a lot of time, like there was one situation this past summer, kid made a joke with some of our counselors of color. We had a couple black counselors who was in conversation with this kid, and they told a joke that they thought these guys would think was funny because based on their experience or probably where they'd heard the joke on social media or wherever in a movie or something like that, they thought it would be a funny joke. And, when they said it, the counselors were like great and gracious. And this kid was like 11 years old or something. And the counselors were like, hey, that's not the best thing to be saying. Well, word got back to me from some of the counselors that was said. And so I had the opportunity to go find the kid. And I drive a little golf cart around sometimes when I'm trying to find kids and have conversations. And he came and sat in the golf cart with me. And we, drove up to over top of the cabins. And we just had a conversation. I was like, hey, I heard you said this joke. And he's like, yeah. And, he was kind of embarrassed, but he didn't quite sense why he should be embarrassed. Like he was like, isn't it just not a big deal? It's just a joke. Like, and so I was like, I totally understand from your perspective why you'd think that. I was like, here's why I think it's actually harmful. And so we were able to talk about, like, as you're saying and joking and talking in that way, subconsciously, here's what you're saying is that you're kind of categorizing this group of people as only having an affinity for these sorts of certain types of things. And what you do is you minimize them as people to these certain passions, these certain interests, these certain abilities, these certain areas of interest, whatever it might be. And so your view of them as people gets really truncated. So you start to see them less and less as children of God and more as this almost clown-like, joke-like version of someone that you have kind of created, basically, in a way. Like you've created a person that of color that's kind of easy for you to understand or to joke about or something like that, but that is a really broken view of what that actually should look like. And so having that conversation with something that kid never thought about before, like he never had like an intentional engagement with that kind of thought process before, and so was able to have that conversation. I was like, yeah, and he was able to articulate back that he understood what I was talking about and kind of like even agree with some of my points, and we were able to have a conversation. It was good, and I was like, yeah, you're gonna have a choice from here on out now that you know this stuff and you've actually like thought about it. You're gonna have a choice, especially when you leave this place and go back to your school and your friends are saying this kind of stuff and joking around like this. You're gonna have a choice. You can not engage and pretend like you don't hear and not say anything. I was like, and ultimately that's a choice, but ultimately that's kind of fence riding and ultimately not a very brave choice. I was like, you can go along with it and make the most cowardly choice of all and go along with it and continue to do those things now that you know and have been confronted with your ignorance. Or you can say, hey guys, I didn't know about this either, but here's a way of thinking about this that you might not have thought of before. And I said that can be a super scary thing to do. And so, we're able to pray together for courage in the midst of that, but that's what it looks like to live for Christ in the midst of these situations. And it can be, like I said, picking up our cross, we're denying ourselves. Like, I don't know why anybody thought that process would be easy, but it just ain't. So trying to help them understand what that would look like. But again, most of the time, the dots aren't connected for campers. And so a big part of us is connecting. How do we take what we know is true in the Bible and how Jesus wants us to live our life, and how do we connect it to every area of life? So our words and our speech, how we are with our friends, how we are on our sports team, how we are in our classroom, how we are in our relationships with a significant other, like all of those sorts of things. And so that was my desire, and that was an opportunity for a small part of that to happen with that kid. And those kinds of conversations are very frequent with campers. So just the way that God's used the brokenness in my life to be able to help guide other people and what I've been able to, like, that's a big part of why I feel like being called to a place like this where I know I am God has equipped me through my own brokenness to have those kinds of conversations with kids who may not ever get a Christian that says that to them. I never had a Christian say those things to me growing up. I just never did. And I think I knew a lot of great Christians, but they had no idea how their faith intersected with that specific aspect of life. And because it wasn't talked about from the pulpit. It wasn't talked about in the church very often. Certainly in very small spaces that I ever discussed. So that's why I think I feel as passionate as I do about the stuff I'm doing now. But in terms of the Tampa stuff, it shaped me a lot because I didn't think I would have another opportunity to go back into the sports media field. And God gave me not only another opportunity, but an opportunity to lead also. I was a part of, basically, I was the director of content for a site that covered the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And as only God would have it, I got that job 1 month before Tom Brady decided to become a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. And so Tom Brady becomes a Tampa Bay Buccaneer, Rob Gronkowski comes, for better or worse, Antonio Brown comes, and all of this, the NFL spotlight is now on Tampa Bay, and which you don't have to know that much about NFL football to know that the NFL spotlight, even when the Bucs won the Super Bowl in the early 2000s, very rarely is on Tampa Bay. They're one of the most forgotten markets in all of football, despite the fact that they're also one of the best organizations in all of football and have been for some time now. So I was able to be a part of covering that team that obviously won the Super Bowl the first year that I was there. We moved to Tampa actually right around the bye week. If you remember, they won their last 4 regular season games and then their 4 playoff games. So they were 8-0 after we moved to Tampa, so not bad. 4 days after we moved to Tampa, I covered that Vikings game at Raymond James Stadium, and they didn't lose after that. So Bucs fans were very graciously attributing the team's success to my family's arrival in Tampa Bay, which was a great running bit in the city for a long time that season until they lost the next year eventually. but it was really fun.
But
and in that time,
got him a Super Bowl.
That's I will say this, and Bucs, I know some Bucs fans will probably listen to this, and something bonds you to a city when you go through that kind of experience together as a media person. Like, it was such a neat, awesome experience. Like, it's a community of fans that, like, yeah, they're the underdog every year. Nobody ever thinks of Tampa Bay, even after they won a Super Bowl. Yeah, when Brady arrived, I don't know where they're at now, but they were the losingest franchise in the entire NFL in terms of win percentage all time. And they'd been through everything. Like, Bucs fans had legit been through hell in terms of fandom. And to see them be able to kind of experience that together. My first year covering the team, a team, that was kind of disappointing going to that bye week and then go 4-0 the playoffs, really whoop the Mahomes-led Chiefs team, which that was just such a neat experience. Like, I remember, because we would do podcasts after each game, and we would go live and we'd be on YouTube, and the fans just pouring in and just like searching YouTube, finding us, and just becoming a part of what we were doing. And it was just really cool, man. There were some people who followed me. Everything I've written and done since then, they've committed themselves to, and our family just felt so much love from Tampa. Like, and I don't think I'll ever stop covering the Bucs in some capacity, unless God calls me away from it, because, like, very clearly, because I just feel such a tie to Bucs fans, I think, and just an affinity for them and what we were going through that year is together, win the Super Bowl, being on top of the mountain. The next year, the devastating loss to the Rams, and a team that I think was even better the next year not getting there, and ultimately, like, the Baker Mayfield and the resurgence recently. It's just there's a bond between the Ledyard family and Bucs fans, and I think obviously with me on the media side that I definitely feel that God's been that blessed me with, I think, to have that. So I definitely feel that. But that was felt, honestly, even as I worked at this website, Pewter Report, which has been covering the Bucs for like a long time, and recently, honestly, they needed a new focus for their content, and I was able to come with some ideas that really enhanced the coverage that we had, I think, and we were able to grow significantly. In the past, I would have become really obsessed with that growth and tried to multiply those efforts, and how can I grind every inch out of every drop of blood, sweat, and tear out of everybody that works there so that we can achieve our peak as a team. To me, that's what it seemed like was loving to people. Like, I'm an acts of service person, and so, like, for me, like, if we all just emptied the clip every day, like, I'd be ultimately loving everybody as much as I could, because we'd all be grinding together, and that's not everybody's love, just because that's how I'm loved. And so I needed to understand what it looked like to step back and, like, love people selflessly, and a lot of that was quality time, and in words of affirmation to people, slowing down what I was doing enough to be able to, hey, you're really good at this, this and this, and I can sense your gifting in this way. So it was a lot of time. It was people who'd been with the company a while saying, you know what, you're not really like the writing thing. Are you even excited about it? Let's get you into podcasting. Let's get you into the YouTube channel. You know what I mean? That's where a lot of your gifts lie. Like, let's explore that. What does it look like for you? What kind of content do you want to produce? Like, all those kind of conversations. Like, people don't think about those things as part of living out your faith. That's part of it, man. Like, it's not just talking about Jesus. Like, that could be part of it, but, like, what's it look like to pursue excellence and to care for other people and what their role or their capacity to do certain things could look like. Like you'll see this in the medical field, John, too. Like how many opportunities do you have to come alongside people who are growing and developing the field and say, hey, I can take a second and help you sharpen the focus that you might have in a certain direction, or help you grow in a certain area. Or, for some people it's literally like, how can I help make you a better writer? That's going to be your path. How can we slow down what I want to accomplish? And so I would take to edit and proofread people's articles. Like, well, we're going to get the same amount of views no matter what. We're going to get the same amount, you know what I mean? But it was just about slowing down out to love and care for the other person. How can I help them develop as a human being? And not only develop, but like, you ever had somebody take the time to actually care about like what you're doing and to nurture you? Like the bond that's formed when that happens, the relationship. And so, yeah, those relationships were formed. People were cared about, and I was cared for by them, and they were cared for by me, and that's how we're supposed to live. And so it was simple, but I would just miss it all the time because I'd be choosing myself and my own agenda over God wanting me to slow down and look up at times. And so that was it was just amazing. I was able to be a part of hiring several people. One of whom, Josh Capo, is one of my really good friends now. We podcast together on the Bucks once a week over on my Substack, Audibles and Analytics, and he is an unbelievable guy who works for Pewter Report and does really great work. And we were able to form a friendship relationship. And Casey Hudson, who just got a job today at NESN up in Boston, and just so proud of her and what she's been able to accomplish is just unbelievable. I remember standing in the parking lot with her after one of our live shows in an event, and she was just like, I just don't even know, like some things fans said to her, just like horrible thing, and her toughness to keep pushing through and keep enduring and keep fighting for what she believed she could accomplish in this field. And JC Allen, like to see him go on and do great things what he's doing now, and like his niche was players and interviewing and building relationships in the locker room. He's unbelievable at it. And it wasn't writing as much, it wasn't like all these other things, it was that. And so you'd be able to have players on his podcast, and be able to have Todd Bowles on his podcast, and Jason Light and Liam Cohen when he was there, and all these guys. Like he's just been Dave Canales, the Panthers head coach, all this stuff. Like it's just been unbelievable to watch him grow and to blossom. Matt Matera is like leading the Pewter Report YouTube channel now and just doing an unbelievable job, and he's expanded that thing and grown it, and the subscribers are just sky high, and he's just got all these different vision ideas. Well, all those people, it was us figuring it out together and working as a team, and some of those people we hired, some of those people we promoted while I was there, but how can we bless them financially? How can we bless them in our investment of time and energy? How can we bless them in terms of their career path? When you invest in people, ultimately, like I never thought about this, but it actually did make us more money. We made more money than we ever made as a company in all the years the company existed. And it wasn't because I grinded my face off and did all the things I was doing before. People felt cared for, and so they wanted to do good work. Yeah. And it's funny how that happens, but that's literally a part of it. And so God just blessed the efforts. Really, it was what it was. But ultimately, no, that's although that stuff was nice and it was great to see God continue to bless what we were doing. Ultimately, it just formed a bond between all of us, I think. And for God to be able to give me the opportunity to do that after I hadn't done, frankly, a very good job of that at the Draft Network was just a blessing from him. And when it was time to leave, it was only 18 months there, but it was 18 incredibly transformative months, and those relationships still exist today. I probably texted in the last week, I've texted every single one of those people I just mentioned, and some of those are people I stay in touch with almost every day. And so it's been an unbelievable blessing for God to continue to work in those relationships, and ultimately that's what it's all about. That's way more important than anything. Again, our treasure's not here on this earth, and so if that's what our goal is and that's what we're striving for, ultimately we're going to be disappointed, as I was with the Draft Network. But when we're set on the things above, only things coming after this life, a relationship with Jesus as we draw closer to him and people, and so that being a focus of mine changed really everything that I did. There's a reason why Jesus did it the way he did. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Okay, yeah, great. That's the vertical part. Love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, that's the horizontal part, right? And when he ascended, what did he say? Go and make disciples of all nations. That's pretty hard to do if you don't build relationships with people. I have not seen it be effective without building relationships with people. And so ultimately that's what we're called to do. And what a joy to be able to do it, right? I mean, there's not much will bring you much joy. There'll be pain, but not much will bring you much joy than building relationships with people and caring for people well too. So God was able to use me in pretty cool ways, and then obviously be able to take that to the camping side of things has been a real joy as well.
Well, in simple terms, that's how the world operates too, right? The world operates through relationships and through connections. And I mean, if everybody just had a selfish agenda and just did whatever they wanted, then nothing would ever get done. And so we have to focus for things to actually keep moving forward, we have to focus on other people's needs. And I think it's, I'm in media relations myself, so I can really resonate with you on that topic of, right now, for me, I'm going through an interview season where I'm uh, trying to find a new job for baseball play-by-play. But one of the things that I've had to look inward on myself is to say, why am I applying for these jobs? What's the motive behind applying for these jobs?
Mm.
And uh, I think I still sometimes find myself in this headspace where it's like, well, I want to keep climbing the ladder and I eventually want to get in a major league booth. And I think
Yeah,
it's fine to have dreams and it's fine to have desires,
100%.
but not when that trumps what our true purpose is, what God has designed us for. And so what I've also had to evaluate is, okay, along that way, while I'm trying to get to that point, what's going to be my primary focus to where I can enjoy the process and do what God's will is for me, and how, and that of course leads to the question of how am I going to make the person that's next to me better? How am I going to bring my colleague up a level as well? And I think, and that's actually been a big pitch in like my interviews is, like what's intriguing about this opportunity to you? Well, it's not so much about me as it is about the person next to me.
Mhm.
And again, that's not to say where I haven't fallen back into that headspace of at times of getting a little too focused on trying to climb the ladder, especially
Mhm.
because I'm trying to find a way to provide for my wife right now. And I'm sure you can appreciate, John, when you're at the
Oh
beginning
yeah.
stages of this industry, it's hard to provide. It really is because God
Yeah,
will
you don't
provide
make
for
any
us
money.
all.
They
Right.
don't tell you that at the end
Right.
you don't make any money either, but
Yeah, sure.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Well, to a point, I mean, you are right. Unless you're Jim Rome or
Mhm.
uh, Joe Buck. I mean, really,
Yeah.
it's a struggle in this industry, but
Yeah.
we do it because we love it, not because we're trying to make money.
Yeah.
Anyways, I really appreciate what you said in thinking about rather than focusing your attention on how you're going to benefit your own cause. And I feel like a society has put a lot of emphasis on that today, right? It's about how can you start your business and get it fired up? How can you start making more money? How can you get, because a lot of worldly views today are about power and money. And especially as men in this Zoom, I'm sure, that's a really big narrative that's pushed on men today too. But if you can set that narrative aside and instead shift your attention to how am I going to focus on the person around me and try to make them better, that I think is more revelatory than trying to build that big business for yourself or trying to accumulate all these assets for yourself. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think convincing people that's true can be a challenge sometimes, or getting them to say it is usually pretty easy, but convincing them it's true in terms of their life actually bears out that they believe it, I think is not that frequent. Well, I haven't seen it that frequently, I think. There are certainly times where that there were I do see people that live that way, I think, but ultimately, yeah, I mean, even outside of like the influence of Christ, I do think there is a sense of, well, what's the best way to lead? Like soft skills are something we talk about a lot in all industries, and we should. And in media industry, I think they really do matter. And frankly, for years they probably still at a lot of major networks, I would say, don't really exist or aren't really prioritized. But I do think they're becoming more commonplace in the workplace to talk about those things and say, like, well, what are ways in which we actually care for other people in terms of how do we deliver messages, how do we challenge, how do we elicit growth from other people, like as leaders in different industries, whatever it might be. I don't think it has to just be media, but in anything, like why are soft skills important? Well, actually, if you actually want growth, what happens is a lot of time people just their agenda got compromised or wasn't met the way that they desire to. So then they just feel like because of their position of power, they have the ability to then express themselves in whatever way they want. That may be true technically, but it doesn't mean that it's actually helpful. So I always say people have to decide whether they want to be angry or whether they want to actually make progress. And a lot of the time, you have to sacrifice your anger, or you have to sacrifice your emotion, or your agenda, or your selfishness in order to see progress actually happen. And some people are able to do that, and some people aren't. And so people who can calm down and slow down and say, "Hey, like." I think actually there might be a better way to do this. Can we approach it this way? Or they can have the soft skills to enter a conversation and say, I wonder if trying it this way actually would be better for you. I wonder if using your skills in this way would be better for you. How you approach conversation is way more important than the actual conversation itself. People are going to either respond well to how you lead or to how you challenge, or they aren't. And the way you approach it almost always, not always, but almost always will dictate how that goes. And ultimately, one of the signs of a great leader is somebody who can cast a vision that other people not just attach themselves to because you said it or because you're in power, but because they ultimately started to care about it to the same degree you do. I don't think that can happen unless you are able to have the soft skills to come alongside people and help shape what their vision for that or what their passion for that might look like. That just takes time and intentionality. That's the biggest difference. A lot of the other stuff is just you're trying to accelerate the process, right? Speed it up, yell at them, get them to pay attention. You want results based, right? Behavior modification. Like that's what power does, right? Power makes those things happen. But that's not something we, as real leaders, you're not interested in that necessarily. What you're interested in is actual growth. And that doesn't really come from behavior modification most of the time, in my opinion. And that's true even we talk about campers at camp. I think that's true too. I want campers who come, make mistakes outside of camp. If you're cussing your head off outside of camp, come to camp and cuss. Like we're going to confront you and talk about those things. Like if you're cussing in front of the kids at camp a lot of time, we're going to talk about what those looks like, to use your words. But I'd way rather you do it like in front of me so where I can have the conversation than hide it the 2 weeks you're at camp and then go home. You know what I mean? And keep doing it. I want you to have those conversations with you. Like it's no good if I'm just like, hey, we don't talk that way here. Well, that doesn't help anything. Like he'll just go talk that way as soon as he gets out of here. Like that. We actually just, why is it not best to talk that way? Or why could it be helpful to speak in a different way? Why do our words matter? Those conversations take time. Those conversations take intentionality. They take slowing down, coming alongside, actually caring for somebody. Just yelling at them and telling them we don't do that here, or telling them to stop doing what they're doing. Yeah, it's easy. It's like it's like the first rung of the ladder type stuff. We call it at camp. But the higher rung, climbing the ladder with them is a walk, right? It's alongside. It's actually a journey with them. And so entering those kinds of things with, we talk about a camper sense, but even with coworkers or people that work for you, the best possible way to lead, in my opinion, is engaging people in that way. And yeah, you've probably seen this, Kyle and John. I mean, you've probably seen this in the medical field too. Like there's just not a lot of leadership that does that, I think, but hopefully you find places where that is done well. And I have seen times where it's done well. I've also worked for a lot of nutcases in my day. And so, and I've been probably more of a nutcase than I should have been to work for at times too. And so you run the full gamut and see all of those things, but ultimately you do really experience the love of Christ when those things are done well, I think.
Yeah, not only that, but when you also take that walk next to you perspective, you know, logically you're giving appreciation to the person that's next to you, and what that does is that allows them to have a base level of trust from the get-go. If you can show that you're genuinely, and again, it's not just the base level, hey, don't do this. It's the we're going to explore and we're going to do this together. It's the togetherness that allows that baseline trust. And then, yeah, like you said, it's not going to happen overnight. Like you don't build that trust overnight. It takes time, but that genuine relationship aspect, that's the relationship that Christ wants with us, right? Nobody starts, like for me, I wasn't raised in the church. I was never taught to believe. But when I did commit myself to Christ, it wasn't like a snap of a finger where I was just like, I got it. Everything's great. It takes time. And I mean, that kind of relationship, we're learning every day and we're still growing every day. But for any kind of relationship, you're not just going to have it right away. It takes time to grow and it takes time to build. But that's that genuineness that also leads you toward the selflessness that we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, all those things play hand in hand, right? It's the fruit of the Spirit, right? Not the different separate fruits from each other. It all grows together, right? And so, yeah, when you're talking about all those things, as being as one, basically, like Christ working in you grows it all, right? And so That's the only way that happens, though. It's just a process of humility and continuing to, like, if I go out and try to lead by my own devices and I'm not in the Word, I'm not in prayer, I'm not in relationship with Jesus, I'm not fixing my eyes on things above, it's just going to be bad. Like, even as somebody who loves Jesus, if my life, my daily choices aren't loving Him, it's just same thing with my wife, right? If I'm not like loving and caring for her, like if I'm not focused intentionally on doing that and what it looks like and my responses to her and how we interact and the time I spend, yeah, that relationship's going to deteriorate as well, and you're going to lose perspective and lose focus on the things that matter. So that part has to come first, but through it, yeah, comes all the transformation you're talking about.
It sounds like once you step alongside someone, and then you have that already purpose of like walking with Christ, like Christ makes himself known in that space with that other person.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's just a one-way ticket to that vertical relationship with Christ for the both of you. And so imagine the domino effect that could happen. If that person comes alongside another person and that vertical relationship with Christ with that person increases, and then it's horizontal, vertical, horizontal, vertical.
Mm-hmm.
And just imagine like the kingdom that could be built if
Mm-hmm.
people just take that first step and going alongside someone.
Yeah, but you have to think, it is a change in perspective, right? Like when we talk about pace, like that's a big part of it. Like pace isn't something we necessarily think of, but it matters. Like with the time and intentionality that matters to care for somebody else the way they need to be cared for does slow down the pursuit of the things, the treasures on earth, and it does often have that effect. Will God continue to bless you in ways, and will He continue to care for your needs? Oh, heck yeah, like it'll happen, but it just happens different than we envision. And so, can we be off our own agenda and on God's agenda? Really hard to do. Everything around us is shiny and nice. It gets shiny and nicer every day. I feel like I love it. I love a lot of things that I do, and it's the time, the desire for me to see like, oh, I love scouting college play. I love podcasts about the NFL. I love all these things, and that's great to love all those things. But is that where my treasure is? Like, is that my priorities are? Is that where my value is? That where my identity is in those things and the accomplishments of those things? When that happens, all the horizontal things you're talking about suffer. And so how can I keep that perspective? Only through Jesus. And so that's where he talks about vertical, horizontal, like you're talking about. 100% right, John. I completely agree. But the transformation happens from Jesus and then filters over into people, and then they catch it and they get transferred. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And thankfully I'm incredibly great. The cool thing is that we get to be a part of, and we're going to talk about our favorite verse in a minute here, like, and what we're kind of thinking of. We get to be a part of. It talks about Romans, like what that looks like. Like that is the part that I think gets lost. Like that's just a gift. Like we don't, like God could do all this without us. We get to be a part of the greatest work that could ever happen. And I think we really take that for granted. I take that for granted all the time. And so understanding that we get to be a part of that kind of work, like we get to be a part of restoration, like that is just ridiculous. Because God's gonna come and Jesus is gonna come and complete it, right? He began a good work and you will complete it until the day of Christ. So when that happens again, like it's gonna be done. So He doesn't need us in the meantime, but like to get there, but he uses us and He calls us to that work, and that's just an incredible thing to be given the opportunity to do that.
I think it's so easy to take that part for granted because we don't necessarily know just how good we can read in the Bible just how good the kingdom of God is going to be, but we've never had the taste of that yet. So we don't know what we're missing out on to its fullest extent. And that, can make it hard to reciprocate to other people as well. But yeah, so let's close the show out real quick. Being in football as one of your main professions, John, that obviously, we talked about the teamwork that is involved in media relations. And of course, there's a lot of teamwork that goes on in football too. And Sharp, I know you were doing a lot of research on this. The college football national championship just happened not too long ago. We got the Super Bowl coming up. You talked about Mahomes. Of course, he's back in it, right? Why wouldn't he be? But solely focusing on this Ohio State game against Notre Dame, that was a really interesting affair because those were two teams. One that is, that claims to be outright a Catholic school in Notre Dame, but you also had these Ohio State players that really put a lot of emphasis on their faith throughout the college football playoffs. And John, I'm going to let you steal the show here because I know, you were talking about them saying it in interviews and what have you. So I don't really know the fullest extent to that. So please enlighten us all about what OSU was specifically doing. And I'd love to end our conversation on that because it's great for the younger generation just to listen, but also, a lot of these people, a lot of these listeners they love sports, they're in sports, and a great way to close off the show. So, John, take it away.
Yeah, before I get into this, one way to segue into this is because, John, you talked about excellency, like in your profession. You're living for God, but you're also pursuing excellency in everything you're doing. And once you started pouring into other people, you said that was the best financial year for your company. And like once you started doing the work of Jesus, pouring on other people, that excellency came. And now with the Ohio State football team, media is calling it a revival happened at Ohio State. You had Ohio State football players, preaching the gospel every Saturday and baptizing any students that came by. Like reports were saying thousands of students were gathering, and just, Travion Henderson, running back for Ohio State, like he seemed to be one of the leaders in doing all this, shares his testimony. All these players are sharing their testimony, and people are just, giving their life to Jesus after, like, oh, this Ohio State football player is supposed to be this jock. Like, he's supposed to just be all cool and that, and, he's like sharing his weakness and like wants to share, like his faith with me, share his life with me. And it's like, why shouldn't I give my life to Jesus? So it was really cool how, they started pouring into other people. And now all of a sudden, the excellency came for Ohio State and winning the championship. And, we know God doesn't favor, one team in a sports competition over the other. But I want to pose the question to you guys. Does it seem like a coincidence that, this revival seems to happen in Ohio State and then this excellency came right afterwards?
It can be looked at so many ways, right? God gave them the ability to also be excellent, literally with how he created them in terms of their skills and their athletic ability and those sorts of things. And so it comes from God one way or another, you know what I mean? I don't necessarily think of it, I guess, as in a direct result. Oh, because they were obedient this way, they got a national championship or something like that. I also won't pretend to know completely 100% how God works in those situations. What I do think is cool is the ability that God has to make such a transformational impact that, even, I've never been in the limelight, even like these guys have been. And so to be Henderson, for example, and have, where's he going in the draft? And, how will he be the second running back off the board, third running back off the board, like after Genty, like all these conversations are happening. And it could easily be all about him. He makes this huge play on the screen and during the playoffs and like all this stuff. It could easily be all about him, and he's deflecting and giving praise to the Lord in the midst of that. And I think, that's what it looks like to have a platform and continue to point other people to Jesus. And so, it's hard to know from our vantage point. I hate to be like just skeptical and everything. Like, again, you have athletes, people come and want to be baptized. Are these people even necessarily like qualified to be baptized? You know what I mean? It's all these like, oh, is this exactly what's happening? Like, actually, like people like giving their lives to Jesus, or in some cases it probably is, in other cases it isn't. And so like it's hard to know all that. But one thing we do know is that Jesus has clearly been at work in this situation, and his name has been glorified and lifted up in this situation because these athletes were continuing to talk about and be all vulnerable and honest about their faith and what Jesus had done in their life. And that's what it looks like. I think, like, yeah, we talk about pursuing excellence and athletics, and man, it is so true. That's what we're all about at Summer's Best 2 Weeks. We're literally trying to teach kids what it looks like to compete in their athletic achievements and endeavors for the glory of God. That's what we want them to understand. What does it look like to do that? Not for the glory of yourself, which is, but for the glory of Jesus, and ultimately in a way to bless other people too, which is pretty countercultural, I would say, into what a sports focus typically should look like. Most of the time it's about what we can achieve or even what a team can achieve. And ultimately, like, it's not necessarily about giving God glory. So if as kids who know Jesus come to our camp or desire to know Jesus, what does it look like to give God glory in the midst of your competition? One of the things that's commonly thought of, I think, outside the church is, well, Christians won't compete as hard or be as physical or give as much effort. And that actually being extremely counter to what Scripture teaches about doing everything we can wholeheartedly to the glory of God. Like, how can you do that if you're, we'll say half butting it on this show. And so, like, how can you do that? You know what I mean? Like, that's difficult to do. And so, giving glory to God with our effort in terms of going 100% in everything that we do, like, man, that really matters, I think. And so trying to teach what that looks like, I think, and these guys exemplifying what that looks like, I don't think they were, skipping practices and film sessions and doing those kinds of things in order to just stand on the street or stand, somewhere on campus and tell more people about Jesus. Not to saying that would have been wrong if they did that. I won't propose to know like exactly how God would be communicating to them or what he would be revealing to them, but there's a pursuit of excellence in their craft that is also glorifying to God. And the shirking of that wouldn't necessarily be glorifying him. It could be what he calls them to in a moment in time, but if he desires for them to pursue excellence in their sport and then to give him glory in that pursuit of excellence, that instead was their focus. And I think that helped achieve what they achieved. And then when they achieved it, they were able to give God the glory in the midst of that. So I think that was really, and by the way, Oklahoma softball, I don't know if you guys are followed this or do you remember when that happened? Like that was
Yeah,
incredible.
that's what I was going to bring up. Yeah.
Yeah. Their post game presser was one of the most jaw dropping testimonies of Jesus that I've ever seen. I was just like in amazement at how they handled it. So this kind of thing has happened more recently, and it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, and for those listening that aren't aware of the OU stuff, it's similar to Ohio State. I mean, they were winning. I don't know if it was multiple consecutive championships,
I think
but
it was, yeah.
yeah, they've had a terrific softball program for a number of years now, and a lot of their players attribute their success right to God and right to Jesus. Now, John, I think Sharp, I think what your question poses an interesting way to look at the situation because, again, as Mr. Ledyard said, there's multiple ways to examine it.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Mr. Ledyard, I'm so old. My God.
No, man, you know what? I was gonna say John, but then there's the other John, and I didn't want to get confused, so I
No,
called
it was very
Sharp.
polite. It was very polite of you. It was very polite of you. I had to throw off your whole train of
Bow
thought.
now, John.
Dude, you gotta believe me when I say I did not mean it like that.
No, I'm just 34 years old. You just can't age me too much. That's all you know.
Oh man, no, but okay. So I'll call you JL then. So
There
as
you go. There you go.
as JL alluded to, there's multiple ways to examine this, and it's kind of impossible to say how much God was at work in this, especially in actually helping them to win the national championship game. But what I think is interesting is when you look at the way how Christ lived, his death represented the ultimate sacrifice for all of humanity in the most selfless way possible. And in order for a football team to be successful, it is a team game. You have to have a relentless, selfless attitude. And so for these people on the Ohio State football team to proclaim their faith as much as they did, to have that instilled, my perspective was, well, I'm sure God is working in them to help in that selfless attitude toward one specific goal of bringing each other together and making each other better as football players, which is the craft that God has given them. And that in turn led them to, and again, JL, you talked about the relentless work ethic that you have to have. That could be another component of how serious their faith really is in their lives. It's the combination of the work ethic and it's the combination of the selfless mentality that drove them to such a successful season. And especially, you think to after that Michigan loss, I mean, the national media was going berserk on Ohio State. It was pandemonium. Is Ohio State really playoff worthy? Are they going to make it to the national championship? Should Ryan Day be fired? And I mean, I grew up in Cleveland. I still listen to Cleveland radio. And John, you grew up in that area as well. And that's all people talked about for weeks until the playoffs rolled around and until Ohio State started whooping butt. So maybe there was that setback that they had to have, so similar to JL. It was that period of where they had to reassess. Okay, let's put all our eggs in the faith basket and let's get back to this selfless mentality, because who knows what was really going on during that Michigan game. But that's kind of the two pieces that I saw resonate that you have to have for a successful football team: that relentless attitude and the selfless attitude. And you think about how Jesus' ministry and how he lived his life, and I think just those two ideas probably have some similarity to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean they definitely do. I mean, ultimately, like it's the coolest thing is for us, like we're seeing this from the outside, and so we're not boots on the ground. We don't know these people, and so you hear this with professional athletes all the time. I have my friends who are Christians, like I love what Russell Wilson said after this. I love so and so said after this game, and I'm like, some of the situations I know these guys. I'm not talking about Russ specifically, but like some of the others, and so I'm like, well, I don't know once they say it in front of the cameras, and then. But the cool thing is with this situation, it's been outside of even that, where like those things have been said. It's not just like I want to thank Jesus like right after the game, but it's consistently, and it's even when it's not like on TV and things like that, where that's been a part of this story, and so you do really see God working in the midst of that, and I think that that's a really cool part of it, and part of the transformation of lives that you want to see, and ultimately that is that's the goal. And so people are, I do think Jesus is working in the midst of that. It doesn't mean he's working in every single situation you read about or every single student that shows up, but like I do think he's working in the midst of that. I think his name is being proclaimed and glorified, and that is awesome.
Yeah, Sharp, that is really cool. I didn't know that they were baptizing and doing all that stuff outside the press conferences and just like the media attention based stuff for their faith as well. So yeah, thanks for sharing that because that's super cool. I think that's a good lesson, for there's a lot of young college athletes and how they can uh, profess their faith in pursuing the game that they love. And it doesn't just have to be in the game. You can do stuff outside. Like JL, you talked a lot about boots on the ground earlier, and that's
Mhm.
actually something that made me think a lot about, what more can I do for myself and for the community around me to keep bolstering faith in Evansville. And so yeah, it's again it's that mindset of more than just a game. Our professions are more than just uh, you have a chance to really hone in on something greater than yourself.
Mhm.
And I think we had a lot of great conversation today. And I think that's a good place to cap us off, unless any of you two fine gentlemen had any closing words, and then we'll get into our verse of the week, our prayer, and how we've seen God work.
Yeah, I just think it's great you guys are doing this. I think it's really cool. I think it's cool to give people the opportunity and platform to be able to talk about these sorts of things. And man, we just got to keep doing it. That's the thing. Like we have to continue. I think as people who have had our eyes opened by the Lord and have been transformed by Him, we have to continue to have opportunities to share. And a lot of that is going to happen probably in the people we're shoulder to shoulder with each day, as we talk about. But man, it's cool to be able to talk about those things for people who we won't be able to reach in that way, but there can be from a distance or an audio setting or video setting where they can encounter some of that stuff and wrestle with some of that stuff and maybe be challenged a little bit or think about their faith differently. Like to be able to have a medium to be able to do that is a really cool thing. So love what you guys are doing and pretty honored to be able to be a part of it. It's been a lot of fun.
It's been an honor to have you, John. And
Thanks, brother.
for our listeners, if you want to listen to more of John, why don't you again just say your other your sites and where else they can find to listen to you?
Yeah, so Audibles and Analytics is the name of my Substack, and everything I do is on that Substack. Basically, I do some work on the side for Pro Football Focus, but most of the stuff that I do is on Audibles and Analytics. And so I talk about the Buck. I have a Bucks podcast on there, Steelers podcast on there, and then NFL podcast a couple times a week with Ollie Connolly, who some people may know from the sports media. Ollie and I are good friends. We podcast on there together. We drop a podcast Thursday morning for people who want to check it out. Off-season team tiers we talked about in the NFL. What are the team tiers that we see of teams going into the offseason, specifically focused on non-playoff teams? So we'll have a part one of that that's out there, and part two will be free. Will be next week. It is like $5 a month to subscribe, and it's like $50 a year to subscribe. If there's a college student listening to this podcast and like that, I would be super interested in this, but that's just not tenable for me. Like right now, like totally get it. Just either email me jledge15@gmail.com and let me know you're interested, or DM me on Twitter at Ledyard NFL Draft, Ledyard NFL Draft on Twitter, and I will just make sure you get access behind the paywall. I don't care about really people paying in general. But I definitely don't care what college students pay. I don't want you guys to have to pay when you're in college. And so if there's college students listening and they're like, hey, I'm a student at Allegheny, I'm a student at another school or something, and that's something I'll hook you up with. So yeah, NFL podcast, NFL writing, NFL draft stuff. I do scouting reports on players. I just put up a couple scouting reports in the last week on guys who are at the Senior Bowl this week. And so yeah, it's been that's kind of what I do when I'm for my hobby. And so if people are interested, they can check it out. Audibles and Analytics is the name of that Substack.
We'll plug all that down in the video description as well. So make sure to check Jon out, JL. He's got some great stuff. So who do you think the Browns should take it to then, based on your analytics?
Oh, yeah, put me on the spot. Probably not a quarterback, but it would be a smart financial decision, I think. But I don't know that this class is the one to go in on a quarterback. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, first thing they should do is trade Myles Garrett, but I don't think you're ready for that conversation, Kyle.
Wow.
No.
Whoa.
We talked about that. We talked about that today on the podcast. If there's Browns listeners, I gave a reasoned perspective as to why that should happen. I know, obviously, from an emotional perspective, that would be dumb, but
Yeah.
the Browns are not going to be good probably when Myles Garrett is continuing to be good in his career. So, from a business perspective, Myles Garrett's 30, and he just played a season very well, but with 2 messed up feet and some other things too that I don't know how much is out there. But he had some health issues this past year, and he still was awesome. But eventually, those are going to zap his ability to play. And at 30, like, is he going to still be there when they're good again at 33? Maybe not. And they can be a way better team 3 years from now if they were to trade him and get 3 first-round picks, which is what they would get. They would get 3 first-round picks, a second, a third. I mean, they would be stacked, and it would be the only way to do this thing again. Now, I understand he might be the best defensive player in the league, and so that's painful. But just looking at it from a business perspective, he probably represents 2 wins. That would be amazing for one player to represent 2 wins, just analytically speaking, over the next couple of years. Where does that leave the Browns likely with their situations at quarterback and the offensive line aging out? And so just from a business perspective, I think it would actually make them a better team a couple years from now if he asked for a trade. From an emotional perspective, I understand. I'm doing the same thing with Steelers fans, by the way, saying like it probably makes sense for them to trade TJ Watt, even though it's not what anybody wants emotionally.
I'm going to get you over the phone very soon here. We're going to have a deep conversation about this because I could talk for hours about sports analytics. And I'm sure you can appreciate that. But you know what? I being a Browns fan, I agree with you. I don't think they should take a quarterback at 2. I'd love to see them trade down to 6 or 7, somewhere 6 through 10, pick up another first rounder. But I mean, you just posed the idea of trading Myles, and if they did that, would they even have to trade down? Because I guess the other big prospect that they would be probably looking at that range, if they're not going quarterback, it's going to be wide receiver or defensive line. And the only reason they'd probably go defensive line is to back up Myles. But if they trade Myles, then they could find a replacement for him.
Yeah.
You
Or
just
to
pose
play
a lot of
play
different
Abdul Carter and
possibilities.
Myles Garrett together. That'd be fun.
Yeah. So, I mean, who knows? The possibilities are endless. And not to go on a Browns tangent because that's not what this podcast is about, but you can go listen to Jon and all of his insightful information if you want, because that is what his podcasts are about. So make sure to check him out. But other than that, let's just close things out here. So, Jon, we talked about this before the show. We're going to do our how have we seen God work in our life this week and our verse of the week. So let's start with the former. So if you want to go ahead and just say how the Lord has worked in your life this week, we'd love to hear.
Yeah. Been a crazy week because we're having like lots of car issues out of nowhere. These happen to everybody, but like just got a call today from our mechanic that our engine died in one of our cars. So replacing that, definitely not a cheap endeavor. So it's been kind of interesting. I was thinking about that. I'm like, and we're going to do it and it's going to be fine and everything. But I was kind of thinking about that. Whenever that happens, you're like, oh yeah, how do I need to, what am I assessing? And so like, it's been interesting to think when you're confronted with like sort of a financial crossroads or things like that, just you start to really think about the ways that God's blessed you to be able to even handle situations like that, different things he's done in your life. You start to think about the things you didn't spend money on that you thought about over the past year and just been like, oh man, that was God. Like God was showing up when I made that decision not to do that or not to buy that. Like he was actually like caring for me by leading me away from those things, even though at the time I was like, for example, the Senior Bowl's happening right now. I was going to pay my own way, go there, and I want to do that eventually again, for sure at some point. I was going to pay my own way there and see a bunch of my old colleagues and connect with people, and it's going to be great. I love the Senior Bowl, and I was just going to use my company money that I made from Audibles and Analytics to some of that to pay for my trip there and for a couple days there, hotels and flights and all that stuff. And, that comes out to a good sum of money at the end of the day, but that's what was something I was going to do. Then an event for my full-time job got moved up to that same week, so I couldn't actually do it. So I didn't end up scheduling anything or paying for anything for that. And now you see this happen. So I'm like, all those things, that's not coincidence. That's God working. You know what I mean? Like, he's caring for me better than I know how to care for myself. So while, yeah, a couple times over last week, man, I wish I could be the senior. Man, I wish like I had found a way to be. Man, I'm like, thinking about myself. And I wouldn't say I was like, feeling sorry for myself or anything, but there are definitely some moments you're like, dang, I really wish I was there. And that can be true, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's been cool to see, like, yeah, I know you were disappointed, but like I actually had something better for you than you could have even imagined. And then tonight, we're driving in tonight while our GMC Acadia is in the shop, and we're driving our other car home tonight with the girls. And I pull, and it's like a 2-lane part of the highway that becomes 1 lane in this one road. And I pull out, and we're leaving my daughter's basketball practice, and I pull out, and I'm going on the right side instead of the left side. I'm taking a left. So normally I move into the left. You were taking a left, you go into the left lane. And so, but I went. It was just nobody on the road, and I was just getting out to the right lane because usually the left lane merges into the right lane. I was just doing it ahead of time. I don't normally do that. I don't know why I did it tonight until I'm like driving in the right lane, and I literally look out the window, like I'm passing, and I look out the window, and there is a deer standing like dead still in the road in the left lane. And I'm passing. I'm just going right past him. I didn't see him at all. Completely dark, and like there's no street lights in that part. So like I'm headlights, but I don't know where this deer even came from. But as I made the turn, like basically and accelerated a couple 50 yards past that point, there's a deer just like, and he's not moving. If he's moving, I probably would have hit him. If I was in the left lane, I would have crushed that sucker, and who knows what would have been left of my car at that point, or us, And so it was like, man, like even in the midst of like a hard situation, like God is showing up. Like I'm seeing him care for me. Like I could have been out 2 cars real quick, you know what I mean? But that wasn't God's plan. He was letting me know he was looking out for me at that point in time and for our family. And so even in the midst of those things, seeing how he works and reminders that even in the midst of a tough situation that my wife and I are like, oh my gosh, can't believe we have to pay for an engine. In the earth perspective is, like, oh my gosh, my finances, like all this stuff. But like, and that stuff matters. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, and we'll sort out all that. But seeing the ways that God's continue, like he's actually caring for me even in the midst of what I see is like, oh, why? Like, you know what I mean? His good is greater than my understanding of what good is. And it's been good to be reminded of that in that way.
Praise God for that. That's an awesome story. God.
Yep.
Cool.
Sharp, go ahead.
All right. In my life, I got to see my dad this past weekend, school, and, being, medically trained these days. He lets me know of any kind of ailments he has, and he had some lower back pain, and I've been learning some new like osteopathic manipulative medicine, and I was able to treat my dad, and he was worried that whole day because he had to go move like some boxes, and he was afraid that his back was going to hurt him the rest of the day. I treated him that morning, and he said he had no pain the rest of the day, and that's my ultimate goal is to bring healing to people. And, Jesus was the ultimate physician, and I stand by that. And I ask for each day for him to, give me a little bit of that healing power so I can, do his will and, heal others in his name. And so that was a cool little taste early on in my med school journey to treat someone, and especially my dad, who I love.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Love it, John. Love it. Hey, that's not the only person you've helped too. I think my inability to give up lifting kind of prolonged this recovery, but just a short story. So over the summer, I got this symptom in my wrist. It's called de Quervain's tendonitis, and it runs from like right here, and it's just a really killer pain.
I have that. Yeah, I have that too. Yeah.
So this was when John like first started medical school. I mean, literally his first week, And I say to him, I had some wrist pain, man. You know what's going on here? I mean, have you studied wrists at all? And he's like, funny, that's like the first thing I'm learning in med school. So I tell him about it, and he's like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what you have. You can go get this cream, and really the biggest thing for you is going to be rest. So I did the cream for a few weeks, and that helped a little bit. But again, because I didn't want to give up lifting, I had the pain continue because I didn't want to rest.
Yeah.
But when Isabel and I went on our honeymoon in Hawaii, I wasn't lifting for a good 3 weeks, and now it's all better. So, John, you were right on the money. The cream worked, the rest worked. So you're on your way to being a great doctor, my friend, and
That's hilarious.
you're going to do a lot of people good. So praise God for that. For me this week, I would say I'm actually going to look forward to Saturday. So Saturday's my birthday, and Isabel and I are going to go camping at a national park, and it's going to be our first camp of the year, and it's supposed to be decent weather, so praise God for that. But I think more than that, it's just I've really come to appreciate being in nature and seeing the stars and just having that perspective of looking up at the stars and seeing how big the universe is. It makes you realize how small you are, and for me, that allows me to kind of shift my attention toward others and just think, you're not alone here, and there's something good that you can offer for this world because God wills for you to do good, and if you just follow Him and what He has, then um, you know it's going to be great. So just seeing those stars up there, and I can't wait to go explore his good green earth and what He's created. So His creations are amazing as well. That's what I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to this week.
I'm the wilderness first aid person here at camp. So like I'm the wilderness trips coordinator. So all of our offsite camps with campers, like I'm one of my jobs in the summer is coordinating all those trips, the details, the vehicles, the food, the pack. They stay overnight, so the equipment, all of that kind of stuff. That like making sure the trip leaders, the college students who lead the trips are trained, and all that kind of stuff. And so one of the things we do on trips is creation meditations, we call them. And so we
Mm,
teach the counselors how to lead times with kids where they're looking at an aspect of creation and trying to understand what does that tell us or communicate to us about who God is. And so having those kind of discussions with kids as they're in the midst of being in creation, which for a lot of kids, if they haven't been to camp especially, will be the first time, or if they've been to camp, it's the only time during the year where they
yeah.
really encounter creation that way and think and start to think about who is the attributes of God as it's experienced through creation. So it's a very unique process, I think, and it's been cool for me to like learn that since I've been here. One of the ways I've grown, kind of in my understanding of who God is, and so it's cool to hear you talk about that kind of stuff because it hits very close to home for me.
Yeah, well, unique's a great word to describe. Do you go on any of the trips as well, or do you just schedule them?
Well, during our training, yeah, I go on trips during our training. So I'll lead either a caving trip or a whitewater rafting or
Yeah.
different things like that. I could lead for our staff during training. So we'll go on them during trip leader training, which is in early May, and then we go on another trip as a staff during orientation, which is when all of our staff are there. And so I'll go on those to train the trip leaders and continue to train them on our protocols, safety, how we do things, emergency response, like all of that kind of stuff. And then during the summer, I usually do go on one trip with our oldest group of campers during one of our 5 terms. Each we kind of take turns as a lead team going on certain trips during the summer, and that's usually the one that I go on with them. So not too much when it comes to the actual campers. Most of the time, that's our staff doing that, but I do try and go on at least one every summer with them.
Super cool. Super cool. All right, we'll jump into the verses of the week. JL, take us away. What's your verse of the week?
Okay, so Romans 8, I've mentioned a couple times, so this isn't necessarily going to, I've even semi-quoted this verse, but this is sort of like where my head's been at recently, because we're going to study with our staff this summer, Romans chapter 8 through at chapter 16 is what we'll study, and each of us that are on a leadership team or full-time staff will lead a Bible study with 5 or 6 guy for the guy on the guy side, 5 or 6 guy counselors that are part of my Bible study. And so one of the things we'll be talking about and going through will be Romans chapter 8. And so we as a full-time staff are preparing for those summer Bible studies even now, and we're going through them together as a full-time staff. And so we're in Romans, and I'm also teaching class in Sunday school at our church that's from the book Experiencing God by Henry Blackaby. And this verse sort of tied into a lot of what we're talking about. And so I won't spend a ton of time on it just because we've talked about a lot of the stuff with it today. And also I know that you guys probably want to end this podcast at some point, and I've talked so much. But it says in Romans chapter 8, Verse 18, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. I'm going to do more than one verse. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope, Paul loves run-on sentences, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. My father-in-law, pastor, probably my hero, and he says he talks about this, and he does such a good job talking about, like, I would love for it to say, for the creation waits in eager expectation for Jesus to come and just save the day, but it doesn't say that. It says, for the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. Who's the children of God? That's us. That's what creation is waiting for, us to be revealed. It's not waiting for just necessarily Jesus to come again. Obviously, that will come at a certain point. It's waiting for us to be revealed. So how are we going to show who Jesus is? Like, that's what creation's waiting for. And it's waiting in eager expectation. It says in some versions, translations, as in the pains of childbirth. And so, like, the anguish, you know what I mean, that creation's waiting for the truth that, yes, Jesus has that, and that will come at some point in time, but it's not waiting for that. It's waiting for us to be the bearers of that truth. That's waiting for us. And so, like, I think that is just like one of the most powerful verses in all of Scripture. For the creation was subjected to frustration or to the pains of childbirth, but not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it. Jesus, God allowed that to be subjected in hope that the creation itself will be liberated or freed from the bondage to decay, or basically decay to the point of moving away from restoration, or what some would go, we talk about as hell. Not that will be liberated, not from that, but instead brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God, the freedom and glory that we understand as children of God. How do we be the revelation of that for other people in terms of how we live our life? What a call, what an opportunity, what a testimony to be a part of the work that God's doing. And it talks about more about the pains of childbirth coming up in verse 22, but I'll leave it there for that. But those couple verses in Romans chapter 8 are just unbelievably powerful, I think.
Amen.
Amen. Sharp.
I got Exodus chapter 14, verses 15 and 16. Here it says, well, context, God's people are backed up at the edge of the Red Sea, led by Moses. The Egyptians are coming after them, and there's nowhere to go. But God says, tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea and on dry ground. So I thought it was cool, and I thought it tied well into your story, John. It's like when you're backed up against the wall, you hit tribulation, you don't know where God's going to take you, and next you know, he opens up the sea, and you're walking on dry ground, and he's setting you towards freedom.
Yeah, that's crazy. Literally, the Red Sea story is just like mind-boggling. Like, you think about God split the Red Sea, and they turned around and they were complaining the next day, and then we're like, well, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. But, I've seen God part the Red Sea in my life, and I've turned around and complained the next day. You know what I mean? And so it's just a testimony that we just need to keep being reminded. We never graduate from the gospel and the truth, and that's a great pull. I love that.
Yeah, we are not grace graduates.
That's right. Not at all. Never.
Yeah, actually about the parting of the Red Sea, it's really cool. I believe his name is Ron Wyatt, who did a dive down to the bottom of the Red Sea. And you can go look this up online. I mean, he was a pretty big archaeologist in regard to biblical findings. And he ended up finding what looked like the chariot wheels that date back to the period of when the Exodus happened. And there were some other artifacts that he found at the bottom of the Red Sea where he was able to take photographs of them. And you can go and look up those photographs online. And I just think that's super cool to add on to John's story. And, just not that we need the evidence to because faith is obviously what drives our relationship with God, but it's just so cool when you find those tidbits of evidence, because then it's it paints a more vivid picture for you. And it's like, man, God really did that. It's so cool that he did that. I mean, the parting of the Red Sea, if you think about how incredibly powerful that is, it's something that the human mind can't really fathom by just reading it. And so to see tidbits left behind for us just gives us a more pretty picture. So I just wanted to share that as well.
That's awesome.
You guys know I like to rock and roll over these last few weeks. I'm going to pull from the magic box or the magic container of verses. So I'm going to pull this one out. This is pink, which I believe I believe this is to read when you're angry. So if there's anybody that's angry for how long this podcast has gone on, and like, oh my gosh, I want this to end. Well, then this verse will be for you, and then we'll get out of your way. And it comes from Proverbs 29:22. An angry person stirs up conflict, and a hot-tempered person commits many sins. So there's your warning that maybe to relinquish your anger and instead go seek Jesus. And of course, that's why we do this podcast, to promote the gospel and to praise God. So, John, JL, I should say, I'm not going to call you Mr. Ledyard again. Don't worry. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast. There's so much good stuff, and man, you gave us so much to think about, and I'm going to be thinking about a lot of what you said for the next good bit. So we'd love to have you back on if that's something you're interested in down the line, and we'll definitely plug all your stuff for sports media down below in the video description again. But again, just one more big thank you to you for coming on and spending time with us and giving your knowledge to us, because again, you gave us some perspectives that I think could be beneficial to everybody, but it definitely was beneficial to me, and I think it was beneficial to John as well. So thank you.
Yeah, you guys are great, man. I really appreciate what you guys are doing. I really appreciate you guys having me on. It's been cool to get to know you, John, obviously pretty well over the last couple of years. And Kyle, our conversation was one I remember going and saying to the guys I work with, man, I don't think we're gonna get this guy camp, but I wish we could. Like, he would absolutely love it. It'd be awesome. And I continue to think that. So if you're ever like, you know what, let's just put aside the, let's see what it would look like even in the married life. Come to camp for a summer, that I think that'd be sweet. But it's all, all that stuff has been like how I felt about you guys, and so it's been really cool to be able to come on here and to be able to do this and talk about our faith in this way. I think it's really important, and I'm glad you guys are doing it.
Really, hey, maybe the door's open, and you never know what the Lord will
That's right.
stir up in my heart. So maybe one day. But yeah, again, thank you. We really appreciate your time, John. Any final thoughts before we close off?
Nope, just a big thank you to John. We appreciate you having you on.
Heck yeah, appreciate you guys.
All right, that's going to do it from us. About 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 20 minutes, somewhere around there. It was a banger episode. Oh, man, I absolutely love this conversation. So if you guys enjoyed, make sure to share it with your friends, and maybe they can get something out of it too. Again, it's about the community. It's about building each other up, and it's about spreading the word of God. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we love you. We thank you. To all the ones in the back, stay fresh, and we'll see you very soon, everybody. Take care.